Get comfortable. Dim the lights if you want. This is going to take a while, and that's the point. The Simpsons has been running since December 17th, 1989. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes, and somewhere in that mountain of content, buried beneath 36 years of couch gags and chalkboard punishments and Homer falling downstairs, there are mysteries the show has never resolved, character threads it pulled and quietly dropped, implications so dark and so carefully constructed that they feel less like accidents and more like something the writers planted intentionally and then walked away from. We covered some of them before. But the thing about a show that has been running for 36 years is that there is always more. There is always another layer. Pull back one curtain, and there is another curtain behind it. And behind that one, another. Springfield does not run out of strangeness. It just keeps accumulating it, episode by episode, season by season, like sediment at the bottom of a river that nobody has ever properly dredged. So tonight we are going back, deeper this time, into the corners of Springfield that the big theories do not quite reach, into the characters who never got their full story told, into the episodes that raised questions the show never got around to answering, into the quiet details sitting in the background of scenes that most people watch without registering, details that mean something if you look at them the right way. This is 4 Hours in Springfield. Settle in. Number, Section 1. The Treehouse of Horror. Problem: what the Halloween episodes are actually telling you. Every October, The Simpsons does something it never does during the regular season. It kills its main characters. It lets monsters into Springfield. It depicts Homer being eaten, Bart being decapitated, Lisa being turned into something inhuman, Marge transforming into something the show cannot quite name. It depicts the family-facing horrors that the regular episodes would never permit. And then, when the Treehouse of Horror episode ends, everything resets. The family is fine, Springfield is fine, the monsters are gone, the deaths did not count. This is the official position. Treehouse of Horror episodes are non-canonical. They exist outside the main continuity. They are a sandbox, a playground where the writers can do things they are not allowed to do in the regular show. The deaths are not real deaths. The transformations are not real transformations. The horrors are not real horrors. They are Halloween entertainment and nothing more. This is what the show tells you. Here is what the show shows you. The Treehouse of Horror episodes began in Season 2, in 1990. The first one was framed as stories Bart, Lisa, and Homer told each other in the treehouse on Halloween night. Horror stories, ghost stories, scary tales meant to frighten. And the framing device established something important. The characters within the episode knew they were telling stories. They were aware that the content was fictional, even within the fiction. The Treehouse of Horror was a story within a story, which is what gave it permission to be darker than anything else the show was doing. But that framing device did not last. Within a few seasons, the Treehouse of Horror episodes stopped using the treehouse as a narrative anchor. They stopped presenting the horror stories as stories being told by characters. They started presenting the horror as simply happening. No framing device. No characters sitting around telling tales. Just Springfield, but wrong. Just the family, but in circumstances that should be impossible. And the question that nobody asks is, if the framing device is gone, what makes these episodes non-canonical? The answer the show gives is that it says so. Producers and writers have stated on record that Treehouse of Horror episodes do not count. Al Jean has confirmed this. The show has occasionally broken the fourth wall to remind audiences that the Halloween specials exist outside the main timeline. These are the official guardrails. And for most viewers, the official guardrails are enough. But look at what those guardrails are actually doing. They are drawing a line between what happens in October and what happens in the other 11 months of the year. They are saying, these deaths do not carry over. These transformations do not persist. These versions of the characters are not the real versions, and the audience accepts this because it makes the Halloween episodes more fun. You can enjoy Homer being murdered by a demon if you know he will be fine next week. The problem is that the line the show has drawn is not as clear as it claims to be. Consider the episode Treehouse of Horror 5, which aired in 1994, the fifth Halloween special. It contains a segment called The Shinning, a parody of Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining. Homer, driven mad by isolation and the absence of television and beer, stalks his family through the Overlook Hotel with an axe. The segment is hilarious and genuinely unsettling in equal measure, a remarkable balance that the Treehouse specials achieved regularly during the Golden Era. But within that segment, Homer's madness is not presented as supernatural. It is presented as the logical conclusion of Homer Simpson without the things that keep him functional. Remove television. Remove beer. Remove the routine sedation of his ordinary life. What you get is a man with an axe. That is not a Halloween story. That is a character study dressed in Halloween clothes. In the same episode, there is a segment called Time and Punishment, in which Homer accidentally turns his toaster into a time machine and keeps disrupting the past, creating alternate versions of Springfield each time he returns. This segment contains a moment in which Homer is shown an alternate timeline, where Ned Flanders rules the world, a version of Springfield so aggressively pleasant and so suffocatingly wholesome that it functions as genuine dystopia. The joke lands because it is funny. But the implication underneath the joke is that Ned Flanders' worldview, taken to its logical conclusion, produces something worse than what Springfield already has. That is a real observation about a real character. That is the show using a Halloween costume to say something it cannot quite say directly during the regular season. This is the pattern. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are not just horror parodies. They are the show operating without its usual constraints, which means they are the show being more honest than it normally allows itself to be. Look at what recurring elements show up in the Halloween specials across the decades. Homer's violence is a constant, not cartoon violence, the kind that appears in regular episodes. Real, purposeful, directed violence. Homer with weapons. Homer as predator. Homer as the thing his family should fear. The regular show cannot sustain this characterization because Homer is supposed to be lovable, but the Halloween specials let the show ask, what is underneath the lovability? And the answer they keep returning to is something dangerous. Bart's supernatural connection is another constant. In multiple Treehouse of Horror episodes, Bart is depicted as having genuine psychic or magical abilities. He reads minds. He warps reality. He manifests wishes into being. These are always played as horror because in the hands of a 10-year-old boy with no impulse control and a deeply anarchic relationship with authority, genuine supernatural power is terrifying. But look at regular season Bart. Look at how many times Bart's plans, which should fail, succeed. Look at how many times the universe bends slightly to accommodate his chaos. The Halloween specials are not inventing a supernatural Bart. They are exaggerating a quality the regular show already assigned to him. Lisa's isolation is a third constant. In Halloween episodes, Lisa is frequently the last surviving member of her family, the witness, the one who sees what others cannot, the one whose intelligence functions as both salvation and burden. This maps directly onto regular season Lisa, who is perpetually the most aware person in any room and perpetually unable to do anything meaningful with that awareness. The Halloween episodes take this dynamic to its extreme. Lisa is the only person who understands what is happening, and nobody listens to her until it is too late. These are not random horror scenarios. These are the show's actual character dynamics, stripped of the comedy buffer that makes them tolerable during the regular season. Now, here is where the Treehouse of Horror problem gets genuinely strange. In 1997, Treehouse of Horror 8 aired. It contains a segment called Homega Man, in which a nuclear bomb destroys Springfield while Homer is safely sealed inside a demonstration bunker. Homer emerges to find the entire town obliterated. Every resident of Springfield is dead. He is the sole survivor of nuclear apocalypse. He wanders the ruins of the town alone, eventually encountering the mutated survivors, who turn out to be most of the supporting cast, transformed by radiation into grotesque humanoid creatures who want to eat him. The segment is funny, but think about what it is depicting. A nuclear device destroys Springfield. The residents who survive are mutated by radiation. The mutation is presented as monstrous, as horror, as something that has taken human beings and turned them into something wrong. Now look at what the radiation theory, the one that has been building across regular season episodes since Blinky the Three-Eyed Fish first appeared, tells us about Springfield's population. The regular show has been arguing quietly and consistently that the Springfield nuclear power plant has been mutating Springfield's residents for decades. The evidence is in the physical characteristics of every Springfield resident: the yellow skin, the unusual proportions, Homer's inhuman resilience, the children born with biological markers that do not appear in populations without radiation exposure. The regular show suggests this is happening slowly, invisibly, across generations. The Treehouse of Horror 8 segment shows you what it would look like if it happened all at once. The Halloween special is not a non-canonical horror story that has nothing to do with the main show. It is the main show's central theme with the timeline compressed. It is the radiation theory with the slow-building subtext removed and the conclusion presented directly. And the show declared it non-canonical. This is the Treehouse of Horror problem. The Halloween specials are where the Simpsons says the quiet part's loud, where the darkness underneath the comedy is allowed to surface without the comedy providing cover. And then the show immediately declares that what you just saw does not count. The deaths are not real, the mutations are not canonical, the violence does not persist. Go back to your regularly scheduled programming. But the audience saw it. The audience absorbed it. The audience spent 22 minutes watching a version of these characters and this town that operated according to the show's actual internal logic rather than the comedic conventions that normally keep that logic suppressed. And here is the question the show never asks. What is the cumulative effect of that? 35 Treehouse of Horror specials. More than 100 horror segments. Hundreds of deaths, transformations, apocalypses, invasions, possessions, and dimensional collapses. All non-canonical. All meaningless in terms of continuity. All forgotten by the next episode. But the audience remembers them. Not necessarily the specific details, not always, but the tone. The accumulated sense that Springfield is a place where these things can happen, where the family can die and come back, where reality is negotiable, where the rules that govern the regular show are not absolute but conditional, subject to revision when the calendar reaches October. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have trained the audience to understand Springfield as a place where anything is possible if you are willing to label it correctly. Call it a Halloween special and you can do anything. Call it non-canonical and the consequences disappear. This is useful for the show's writers because it expands what they are permitted to do. But it is also quietly destabilizing because it establishes that the rules governing Springfield are not inherent to Springfield. They are a choice. The show chooses on a week-by-week basis which rules apply, and the Halloween episodes are proof that the choice can always be made differently. There is a theory among longtime fans that the Treehouse of Horror episodes are not actually non-canonical, that they are the most canonical material the show produces, precisely because they are the episodes where the show stops pretending. The regular episodes are the performance. The Halloween specials are the rehearsal, and in rehearsal, the truth comes out. Consider the continuity of tone across the Treehouse of Horror episodes over the decades. In the early seasons, the horror segments were brighter, more comedic, more clearly parody. The shinning is funny. The Raven segment from the very first special is beautiful and whimsical. The horror was always present, but it was balanced by genuine warmth, by the sense that these characters, even in nightmare scenarios, cared about each other. Watch the Halloween specials from the later seasons. The humor is still there, but the warmth is different. The family members are frequently shown turning on each other, betraying each other, surviving individually rather than collectively. The horror scenarios in the later Treehouse episodes are darker in a way that does not feel like simple creative escalation. They feel like the show processing something it cannot process in the regular episodes. The thing that changed between the early and later Halloween specials is the same thing that changed between the early and later regular seasons. The characters became more isolated from each other. The emotional core of the show, the thing that made the family feel like a family, became harder to access. The warmth did not disappear, but it became more effortful, more occasional. The Halloween specials reflect this. The early ones used horror to illuminate the characters' love for each other. The later ones use horror to isolate the characters from each other. This is not a creative decision made only for October. This is a development visible across the entire series. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are just the place where it is most visible, because the genre gives the show permission to be direct about what it is depicting. Here is the final piece of the Treehouse of Horror problem, and it is the one that sits with you longest. In Season 23, Treehouse of Horror 20 aired. One of its segments was called In the Na'vi, a parody of the film Avatar. In this segment, Homer is sent to a distant planet to infiltrate the native population and extract resources for a corporation. The segment is funny. The Avatar parody is well executed. But the parallel sitting underneath it is exactly what the show has been depicting in its regular episodes for over 2 decades. Homer, employed by a corporation, serving corporate interests at the expense of the community he is embedded in, the native population suffering environmental destruction caused by industrial extraction. A system in which the worker is both victim and instrument of the very harm being done to the people around him. Strip out the alien planet, replace the avatar technology with a nuclear power plant, replace the distant corporate interest with Burns Enterprises, and you have a regular season Simpsons episode. The Halloween special was not horror. It was the show's actual premise in a costume. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have been doing this for 35 years, using horror, science fiction, fantasy, and genre parody as containers for the show's real content. The things The Simpsons actually wants to say but cannot say during the family-friendly 8 p.m. time slot on a Sunday night. The Halloween specials are where the show tells its own truth, wrapped in enough genre clothing that the truth reads as entertainment rather than confession. And the show declares them non-canonical. You can decide what to do with that. Drop a comment below letting me know what time it is where you are and what city you're watching from. And if this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe. It genuinely helps. Now, let's keep going. Number. Section 2. The Real Story of Sideshow. Bob A. Man, the show made impossible. Sideshow Bob is the best villain The Simpsons has ever produced. This is not a controversial position. Kelsey Grammer's performance, the character's operatic ambitions, the running gag of his plans being foiled by a 10-year-old boy, the recurring rake gag that somehow never stops being funny across 30 years, all of it combined to create something the show has rarely managed with any other antagonist. A character who is simultaneously ridiculous and genuinely threatening. A character whose intelligence and cultural sophistication make his repeated failures more devastating rather than less. But something happened to Sideshow Bob across the decades that the show has never properly acknowledged. And it is not just that the character became a recurring joke rather than a genuine threat, though that happened too. It is something deeper. Something about what the show actually established about Bob in its early seasons, and then quietly abandoned when it became inconvenient. Let's go back to the beginning. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. That is his full name. The show establishes this early, and it is worth noting because every element of that name is doing work. Robert, a traditional and formal name, the kind given by parents with expectations. Underdunk, the kind of middle name that carries old family weight, possibly inherited, possibly a burden. Terwilliger Jr., because there is a senior, there is a father. There is a family lineage that Bob comes from and returns to and is in conversation with throughout his life. Bob grew up privileged. The show makes this clear. His brother, Cecil, shares his vocal patterns, his vocabulary, his cultural references. The Terwilliger family is educated and wealthy in a way that Springfield rarely produces. Bob attended a prestigious university. He is conversant in multiple languages. His knowledge of opera, classical literature, musical theater, and fine art is not the knowledge of a self-taught man. It is the knowledge of someone who was raised in environments where these things were considered normal requirements for a cultured person. And then he ended up as the sidekick on a children's clown show. The show gestures at this biographical detail but never fully excavates it. How does a man of Bob's background end up working for Krusty the Clown? The official answer is that Bob needed money after his plans to enter the theater failed. He auditioned, he got the job, and he spent years in the deliberately degrading role of a sidekick whose entire purpose was to be humiliated for the entertainment of children. But that is not quite enough. People with Bob's education and family background do not typically exhaust their options so completely that children's television becomes the fallback. Something happened before the show begins. Something narrowed his options down to a choice between the Krusty Show and destitution. And the show never tells us what that thing was. What we get instead is the moment that Bob's arc on the show officially begins. He frames Krusty for armed robbery. He frames a man whose show he is on, whose paycheck he depends on, whose audience he performs for every day. He plants evidence. He lies to the police. He puts an innocent man in prison. And the reason Bob gives for this, when the reason is given at all, is that he deserved better, that Krusty's show was beneath him, that the constant humiliation of the sidekick role was destroying something essential in him, that he framed Krusty because existing as Krusty's punching bag had become intolerable. This is a reason. It is even a somewhat understandable reason, if you allow for the premise that Bob is genuinely exceptional and genuinely trapped. But it is also a deeply dark reason, Because what it tells you is that Bob's capacity for harm scales directly with his wounded pride. The smarter and more cultured he is, the more intolerable his situation becomes, and the more elaborate and destructive his response. The show finds this funny. And for a while, it is funny. The genius villain foiled by the child. The man of culture outwitted by a boy whose greatest literary achievement is reading the back of a cereal box. The rake gag. The Gilbert and Sullivan numbers. The whole package. But in making it funny, the show gradually lost the thread of what it had actually built. In the early Sideshow Bob episodes, there is real danger. When Bob tries to kill Bart in the episode Black Widower, he almost succeeds. He has thought it through. He has constructed an alibi. He has planned it carefully. Only Bart's accidental genius saves him, and the closeness of the call is played as genuinely alarming. The show at this stage was not pretending that Bob was harmless. It was using the comedy to make the genuine threat more bearable to watch. By the later seasons, Bob had become a comedy character who periodically remembered he was supposed to be trying to kill Bart. The threat evaporated. The elaborate plans became self-parody. Bob himself seemed aware that he was no longer genuinely dangerous, which turned his villainy into performance, which is a very different and much less interesting thing. But here is what the show actually built underneath all of that and then chose not to follow through on. In the episode Brother from Another Series aired in Season 8, the show introduced Cecil Terwilliger, Bob's younger brother. And Cecil's existence rewrote everything we thought we understood about Bob's psychology. Cecil, it turns out, was the one who originally wanted to be Krusty's sidekick. Cecil had been Krusty's original choice for the role. Cecil had spent years preparing for the audition, studying comedy, working on his performance. And at the audition, Bob showed up and accidentally got the job that Cecil had been preparing for his entire life. Bob did not even want it. He walked into the room, made Krusty laugh involuntarily, and was offered the position that Cecil had been treating as his destiny. And Cecil spent the next however many years living with that. The dynamic between Bob and Cecil in Brother from Another Series is extraordinary television. Not just for the comedy, which is genuinely excellent, but for what it reveals. Cecil's resentment of Bob is the resentment of someone who was displaced by a person who did not even value what they took. Bob did not want to be Krusty's sidekick. He despised the role. He felt diminished by it. He escaped it as soon as he found a way out, even if that way out involved framing an innocent man for armed robbery. Meanwhile, Cecil wanted nothing more than the thing Bob was trying to escape. Cecil would have treasured the sidekick role. Cecil would have been grateful for it. There is something genuinely tragic in that dynamic. The thing one person treasures is the thing the other person treats as unbearable. The opportunity one person spent years preparing for is the opportunity the other person fell into and immediately resented. And both of them ended up twisted by it. Bob into a murderous genius. Cecil into a resentful brother who eventually turned to crime himself, building a dam with substandard materials and pocketing the difference, planning to blow it up and frame Bob for the destruction. The show does extraordinary things with this in one episode, and then essentially drops it. Cecil appears in later seasons, but the weight of the relationship is never fully explored again. The idea that Bob and Cecil are mirror images of each other, that they are two versions of the same privileged, intelligent, culturally sophisticated person who both ended up broken by the same original injustice, is touched on and then let go. This is the Sideshow Bob problem. The show kept using him as a villain and kept finding funny new contexts for his villainy. Italy, the future, his son, eventually becoming mayor, eventually actually killing Bart in a Treehouse of Horror episode just to see what that would look like. But it stopped building him. It stopped adding layers. It found the performance and stayed there. What was actually there, underneath the performance, was one of the most carefully constructed character histories in the show's run. A man from a background of privilege and culture who fell through every safety net that background should have provided. A man whose intelligence, the very thing that should have made his life easier, made his failures more spectacular and his resentments deeper. A man with a brother whose existence functioned as a permanent reminder that the life Bob had was taken from someone who actually wanted it. There is a version of Sideshow Bob's story that is not a comedy villain arc. It is a story about a family in which every member was given advantages, and every member found ways to waste them, to corrupt them, to turn them against themselves and each other. Bob and Cecil are not anomalies in their family. They are what happens when high intelligence and high expectation combine with insufficient emotional scaffolding. when being exceptional is treated as sufficient reason to be loved, and when the exceptionalism fails to deliver on that promise, the result is the kind of person who frames an innocent man for robbery, because the alternative is admitting that his own choices led him to a job he despised. The show gave us all the pieces. It just never assembled them into the thing those pieces could have built. There is one more element of Sideshow Bob's story that deserves attention, and it is one the show raised explicitly in season 26 and then handled with somewhat less care than the material warranted. In the episode Simpsonocalypse, Bob finally kills Bart. He succeeds. He has been trying for 20-some years and he does it. And then he discovers that killing Bart has not given him what he wanted. The decades of planning, the obsession, the recurring attempts, all of it was sustained by the anticipation of success. Without Bart alive to try to kill, Bob has nothing. This is genuinely interesting psychology. The villain whose identity is so thoroughly built around his nemesis that destroying the nemesis destroys the villain's purpose. Bob needed Bart. Not to kill, but to fail to kill. The perpetual failure was the structure around which his entire post-prison life was organized. It gave him something to be. Without it, he was just a man with a law degree and a history of incarceration and a set of skills that included boat navigation and Gilbert and Sullivan performance, but not really much else that society considered useful. The show played this for comedy. It resolved it by having Bart revived and the dynamic restored. But the observation at the center of that episode is the most psychologically acute thing the show ever did with Bob. He is not a villain whose goal is to win. He is a villain whose goal is to keep playing. Winning would end the game. And the game is the only thing keeping him functional. You can read the entire Sideshow Bob story through that lens, and it becomes something far more melancholy than the show's treatment of it suggests. A brilliant man who cannot stop because stopping would mean confronting what he actually is without the costume of villainy to define him. A character who uses ambition as armor against self-knowledge. A person for whom the plan, however absurd, however repeatedly failed, is preferable to the absence of a plan. That is not a cartoon villain. That is a study in how people use their worst impulses to avoid their deepest fears. The show had this. It had all of this. It just decided that the rake gag was funnier, and maybe it was right. But the other thing was there, and it never got told. Number Section 3. Bart's Missing Future. The 10-year-old who cannot grow up. Here is a fact about Bart Simpson that the show has never comfortably reconciled. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since December 17th, 1989. He will be 10 years old for as long as the show continues, which based on current trajectory could mean he will be 10 years old until sometime in the 2040s. He is the most famous 10-year-old in the history of American television. He is the most famous 10-year-old in the history of American anything. And the show has imagined his future at least 4 separate times and then refused to let him get there. This is the Bart problem. The floating timeline and the no aging rule apply to every character, but they apply differently depending on what the character was designed to become. Lisa is designed to be wise beyond her years, which means her stasis is almost appropriate. She is 8 going on 35, and the lack of actual aging is at least tonally consistent with what the character already is. Homer's stasis is explained by every fan theory in existence. Marge's stasis is tragic in ways we have already discussed. Maggie's stasis is her whole mystery. But Bart's stasis is different, because Bart is the character most defined by trajectory, by growth, by the question of what he will become. Lisa is already what she will become. Homer has already become what he is. But Bart is caught in the moment just before becoming. He is perpetually pre-adolescent, perpetually on the threshold of the developmental stage that would begin to answer the question of who he actually is underneath the pranks and the rebellion and the grin. And the show has frozen him there, not at the destination but at the departure gate, forever. The 4 imagined futures are worth examining individually because they collectively constitute a portrait of a person the show has sketched but refused to paint. The first is from the Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, which we have discussed in this context before. The flash-forward is centered on Lisa, but it includes Bart, who is shown as a young adult in his mid-20s, working as a demolition contractor who is also, apparently, engaged to be married. He is cheerful. He is not particularly ambitious. He has channeled his childhood destructive energy into a career that pays him to knock things down. He is happy enough. He has not become anything remarkable. This is a gentle future for Bart. It is the future that says, this child who struggled with everything academic and institutional eventually found his footing in a world that had room for the kind of intelligence he actually had. He is not a failure by any meaningful measure. He has a job, a partner, a life. He just did not transform into someone unrecognizable. He became a grown-up version of himself. The second imagined future comes from Bart to the Future in Season 11, and it is considerably bleaker. Adult Bart is a middle-aged failure living in Lisa's shadow while she serves as President of the United States. He is a musician whose band never made it. He is still couch surfing. He is still coasting on charm and good luck and finding that neither is quite enough anymore. The future this episode imagines is not cruel to Bart, but it is honest in a way the show does not always manage. It imagines a version of Bart who ran out of time and did not notice until the time was already gone. This is the future that most closely matches what the trajectory of his character in the regular episodes would suggest. A brilliant but underperforming child becomes a brilliant but underperforming adult. The pranks stop being charming. The cleverness stops compensating for the lack of follow-through. The gap between what Bart could be and what Bart chose to be becomes something he has to live with rather than defer indefinitely. The third imagined future is from the Season 8 Treehouse of Horror episode The Bart Zone, which we have established as technically non-canonical but thematically central. In this segment, Bart has full psychic powers and has used them to reshape Springfield into a benevolent but suffocating dictatorship. He has the power to do literally anything and has chosen to use that power to keep everything exactly as it is. He has frozen Springfield. He has made change impossible. He has ensured that nothing can happen without his approval, and that anything he disapproves of can be instantly erased from existence. This is Bart as God, and the horror of the segment is not that Bart is malicious. It is that he is benevolent. He genuinely wants the people around him to be happy. He just wants them to be happy on his terms, in his Springfield, forever, without changing or leaving or becoming something he did not anticipate. The horror of the segment is that Bart's deepest impulse, when given unlimited power, is to stop time, which is what the actual show has done to him. The fourth imagined future is less specific, more ambient. It is built from the various episodes in which adult Bart appears briefly in flash-forward segments, dream sequences, or what-if scenarios. These versions of Bart are scattered across the series and they are collectively inconsistent. Adult Bart is happy, then miserable, then financially successful, then broke, then married, then single, then connected to his family, then estranged from them. There is no coherent adult Bart. There is a collection of possible adult Barts, each generated by a different writer for a different episode in a different season, assembled without reference to each other, which tells you something important. The show does not have a vision of who Bart becomes. It has a collection of guesses. This makes sense if you think about it from a structural perspective. The show cannot commit to a single adult Bart, because committing to him would mean choosing. Choosing would mean some possibilities are eliminated, and the floating timeline is built on the premise that possibilities are never eliminated. Bart can become anything because he is still 10. He has not become anything yet, and as long as he remains 10, the question of what he becomes stays open, and the show retains its flexibility. But here is what that flexibility costs. Bart Simpson's emotional arc, the one that the show spent its best seasons carefully constructing, is built around the question of whether a child who has been failed by every institution designed to help him can still find his way. School has failed him. The educational system in Springfield has looked at Bart and seen a discipline problem rather than a child with an unusual kind of intelligence. Teachers have tried to hold him back, to manage him, to suppress the qualities that make him inconvenient in a classroom setting. The show made this explicit when Bart temporarily moved to a higher-level class and excelled. He is not unable to learn. He is unable to learn in the environments Springfield provides for him. His family has loved him but has also consistently misread him. Homer sees Bart as a reflection of himself in youth and responds to him accordingly, sometimes with genuine connection, sometimes with the frustration of a man who sees his own worst qualities projected back at him. Marge sees Bart as a problem to be solved, a boy whose energy and creativity are symptoms rather than gifts. Lisa sees Bart as competition and often as a disappointment, which is a particularly painful dynamic because Lisa's disapproval lands harder than most people's. And Bart absorbs all of this. He absorbs the institutional rejection and the familial misreading, and he converts it into exactly the performance they expect from him. He acts out because acting out is what the audience expects, and because it is also the version of himself that he has the most control over. The pranks are not random. They are Bart's way of saying, if you are going to define me as trouble, I am going to be the best trouble you have ever seen. The arc underneath all of this, the emotional story the show was building through the first several seasons, was pointing toward something, toward a Bart who eventually finds his way through the maze the world has built around him, who discovers what his actual gifts are and finds a context in which they matter, who grows up, in other words, who becomes someone. And the show cannot let him, because Bart growing up means the show ends. Because the premise of The Simpsons is the family in the house, together, young enough to still be at home, still functioning as a unit. Bart at 20 is Bart out of the house, and the house is where the show lives. So Bart stays 10, and the arc pointing towards something stays at mid-trajectory, and the boy who could have become someone interesting remains the boy who is about to become someone interesting forever, because forever is easier than arrival. There is a moment in Season 8, in the episode Hurricane Nettie, that is not about Bart but reveals something essential about his situation. Ned Flanders, undergoing his psychological breakdown, screams at the residents of Springfield and lists their specific failures as human beings. When he gets to Bart, he calls him an underachiever and proud of it. And Bart, remarkably, does not laugh it off. He looks slightly wounded. He absorbs it differently than the other insults being thrown around him. Because Bart knows. At some level underneath the performance of underachievement, Bart knows that the underachievement is a choice he makes every day, and that one day the choice will calcify into fact. That one day the gap between who he could be and who he chose to be will stop being a gap and will become his actual life. The show gave Bart that knowledge and then refused to do anything with it. He goes right back to the same patterns after that episode. The knowledge did not change anything. And the reason it did not change anything is that the show cannot afford for it to change anything, because change leads to growth, and growth leads to the dreaded aging that the floating timeline absolutely prohibits. So Bart carries that knowledge, quietly, underneath the pranks and the skateboard and the eat my shorts. He knows what he could be. He knows what he is choosing not to be. He knows that time is running out, except that in Springfield, time never runs out, which means he is frozen in the moment of the choice, choosing the same thing every week, forever. That is not funny. That is something genuinely bleak dressed in the costume of a cartoon kid. And it is what The Simpsons built when it committed to the floating timeline. It committed to Bart's suffering as much as it committed to his comedy. The suffering just does not get acknowledged, because acknowledgement would require the show to do something about it, and there is nothing to be done. The choice was made in 1989. The loop was set, and Bart rides his skateboard through it, grinning, every Sunday night, 10 years old and knowing exactly what that means. Number. Section 4. The Flanders Family Darkness. 3 generations of repression and what it cost them. Ned Flanders has been Homer Simpson's neighbor since the very beginning. He has been there in the house next door since the pilot episode, present in the background of Springfield's social ecosystem from day one. And in 36 years, the show has made him into a genuinely complex character almost entirely by accident. The complexity started as a joke. Ned was designed as Homer's foil. The neighbor who does everything right, who is kind and generous and religious and physically healthy and financially responsible, who is in every visible way a better person than Homer, and who Homer irrationally resents for it. The joke was Homer's resentment, not Ned's goodness. Ned was the straight man, the target, the object of comedic frustration. But the show kept writing for Ned. It kept finding things to do with him. And in finding things to do with him, it kept discovering that there was more there than the original design intended. The first significant layer was added in Season 8, in Hurricane Nettie, which we have already touched on. This is the episode that revealed that Ned's relentless positivity is not innate. It is the product of childhood behavioral conditioning. Ned was a wild, uncontrollable child. His parents were beatniks who did not believe in discipline, who let him run feral, who saw his aggression and chaos as authentic self-expression rather than behavior that needed to be shaped. When Ned's parents finally acknowledged that something needed to be done, they took him to a doctor who spent 8 years conditioning the anger out of him. The show plays the description of this therapy for comedy. Homer is in the therapy room and his presence accelerates the deconstruction of Ned's conditioning, leading to the breakdown that the episode has been building toward. It is funny. It is also a genuinely disturbing account of what was done to a child in the name of making him functional. 8 years. Ned spent 8 years in behavioral modification that was designed to remove his capacity for expressing negative emotion, not to help him understand his anger, not to give him tools for managing it, to condition it out of him, to rewire his responses so that the anger stimulus no longer produced the anger behavior, to make him, essentially, incapable of the emotional honesty that the rest of us take for granted. The doctor's conclusion, revealed in the episode, is that the therapy worked too well. He overcorrected. Ned is not just managed, Ned is sealed. He has no outlet for the feelings the therapy taught him to suppress. They do not disappear. They accumulate. And every so often, when the pressure exceeds the container's capacity, they escape in exactly the kind of explosion that the therapy was designed to prevent. This is the dark foundation of Ned Flanders, a man who was modified by medical intervention as a child to be incapable of the emotional range that makes human beings human, and who has spent his entire adult life performing the personality he was given, while the person he actually is, the feral, angry, uncontrolled child from the Upper East Side, sits in a sealed room inside him and waits. The show did this in season 8, and then continued using Ned as the wholesome neighbor for the next 28 seasons, occasionally allowing him to crack, occasionally showing the seams, but never fully committing to the implication of what it had revealed. The implication is this: every kindness Ned has ever shown is the product of conditioning rather than choice. Every moment of forgiveness, every turn of the other cheek, every time he said Oakley dokley and meant it, was not virtue, it was programming. Ned has never chosen to be good. He was made to be good. And the difference between choosing goodness and being engineered into it is not a small distinction. It is the entire distinction that separates morality from mechanism. This matters most in the context of Maude. Maude Flanders died in season 11, in the episode Alone Again, Natura Diddly. She was killed by a t-shirt cannon at a racetrack. Homer was dodging the t-shirts. They hit Maude instead, and she fell from the bleachers. She died. And Ned forgave Homer. He did not hold it against him. He processed his grief through his faith, through his community, through the kind of publicly graceful mourning that made everyone around him feel comfortable and made Ned's actual interior experience essentially invisible. Maude's death was real, not a dream sequence, not a Treehouse of Horror segment. Maude Flanders died in canon and stayed dead, which is unusual enough in Springfield to be worth noting. The show committed to her death in a way it commits to very little. The reason Maude died, the real-world reason, is that the voice actress Maggie Roswell had a dispute with the production regarding travel reimbursement. The dispute was not resolved. The character was killed. This is the kind of information that should probably stay in the DVD commentary, and yet knowing it changes the way Maude's death lands. A woman died in a cartoon because of a contract dispute. The character's fate was determined by a business disagreement that had nothing to do with the story, which means Ned's grief, one of the most extended grief arcs the show has ever given a character, the seasons of him trying to date again, the eventual relationship with Edna Krabappel, the whole long aftermath of losing Maude, was built on a foundation of contingency. Maude died because the voice actress left. Ned's grief is real within the fiction, but the cause of it is external to the fiction in a way that most character deaths are not. The show did something interesting with this grief. It let it last. It let Ned be visibly broken for longer than the show usually allows its characters to be broken. He did not reset after one episode. He carried it. The dating attempts were awkward and painful and occasionally funny, but underneath the comedy was a man who had lost the only person, based on the show's evidence, who had ever fully understood what was inside him. Because here is what the show established about Maude, quietly and mostly in retrospect. Maude was not just Ned's wife. She was the only person who knew about the conditioning. The only person who knew that the Ned the world saw was not the unmediated Ned. She lived with the real one. She was the person who encountered Ned in the private hours when the performance is less necessary, when the Oakley dokley can be put down for a while and the man underneath it can exhale. Without Maude, Ned has no witness. No one who knows what he actually is. He is performing for an audience that has never seen the show's actual protagonist. Every person in his life, including Homer, who is paradoxically his closest friend, knows only the conditioned version. And with Maud gone, there is no one left who knows the difference. The Edna Krabappel relationship, which began in season 22 and ended with the death of the voice actress Marcia Wallace in 2013, is the show's second attempt to give Ned a witness. Edna is interesting as a partner for Ned precisely because she is the opposite of what you would expect. She is cynical where he is earnest. She is pragmatic where he is idealistic. She smokes. She has a history with men that Ned's first marriage would have found troubling. She is exactly the wrong person for Ned Flanders on paper. But she might be exactly the right person for the Ned Flanders who lives in the sealed room. The unconditioned one. The wild child from the Upper East Side who had the anger removed but who might still have the appetite for something complicated, something challenging, something that does not conform to the template of the good Christian life he has been performing for his neighbors and his God for his entire adult life. The show flirted with this reading of their relationship, and then the voice actress died and Edna died with her, and the question of whether Ned could have been someone different with someone who could see behind the conditioning was closed before it was fully opened. Now let us talk about Rod and Todd. Rod and Todd Flanders are Ned's sons. They are present in almost every Springfield-wide scene. They share their father's vocabulary, his patterns of speech, his religious framing of daily life. They are, by every external measure, smaller versions of Ned. Mini-Neds. The show uses them primarily as joke delivery systems. They say things that only make sense if you have grown up in Ned's house. And the comedy comes from the gap between their wholesome earnestness and the world they are navigating. But there is something else going on with Rod and Todd. They are growing up in the house that Ned's conditioning built. They are being raised by a man who cannot model emotional honesty because emotional honesty was removed from his behavioral toolkit before he was old enough to understand what was being taken from him. They are learning how to be people from a person who was engineered into his personhood rather than developing it organically. What does that produce? The show does not fully answer this because Rod and Todd do not age any more than Bart and Lisa do. They stay in their early childhood indefinitely, which means the consequences of their upbringing are deferred the same way Bart's consequences are deferred. We see the formation. We never see the product. But there are glimpses. Rod and Todd respond to normal childhood stimuli with a kind of anxious earnestness that suggests they have already internalized their father's conditioning. They seek approval constantly. They are distressed by conflict. They respond to the ordinary chaos of neighborhood life, Homer being Homer, Bart being Bart, with what seems like genuine alarm rather than the resilience most children develop through exposure to small doses of disorder. This is what you would expect from children raised by someone whose own capacity for resilience was replaced with suppression. Ned cannot model healthy emotional processing because he has no healthy emotional processing. He has suppression, he has conditioning, he has a very sophisticated performance of wellness, and his sons are learning the performance rather than the thing the performance is supposed to represent. The Flanders family, across 3 generations, if you include the beatnik parents who started the whole cycle, is a story about the cost of not allowing people to be who they actually are. The beatnik grandparents suppressed Ned through neglect and then through overcorrection. The doctor they eventually hired suppressed him through modification. Ned suppresses himself through daily performance. And his sons are in the process of learning to suppress themselves through the example of a father who cannot show them any other way. This is not funny. Or it is funny in the way that the best Simpsons material is funny, which is that it is funny on the surface and genuinely sad about 3 inches underneath. The show built all of this. The beatnik parents were shown, the conditioning was explained, the effects were depicted, the sons were given enough screen time to suggest the intergenerational pattern. And then the show kept making Oakley-dokley jokes. Both things are true. The comedy and the tragedy exist in the same space. That is what The Simpsons at its best always managed. The laugh and the ache, simultaneously, neither one canceling out the other. Ned Flanders is the show's most tragic character. Not because the worst things happened to him, though losing 2 wives and being raised by parents who then handed him over to behavioral modification is a fairly strong argument, but because the worst things that happened to him were done in the name of helping him. Every person who shaped Ned into who he is believed they were doing him good. The beatniks believed freedom was better than discipline. The doctor believed that the discipline they should have provided could be retroactively installed. Maud believed she could love the real Ned through the layers of conditioning. The community believed his goodness was genuine and worth celebrating. Everyone in his life meant well. And the result is a man who has never once, in 36 years of screen time, been fully himself. That is the Flanders family darkness. Not malice, something worse. Care without understanding. Love that could not see past the surface to what was actually needed. And a man who paid for everyone else's good intentions with everything that was uniquely his. Number. Section 5. Mo Sislak's buried identity. The bartender who was someone else completely. Mo Sislak owns a bar in Springfield. He tends it alone, which is unusual for an establishment of Mo's Tavern's size. He is perpetually single, perpetually depressed, perpetually oscillating between genuine warmth for his regulars and a hostility toward the rest of the world that occasionally tips into something darker. He makes prank phone calls come in, from Bart mostly, and he responds to them with the escalating fury of a man for whom each prank is confirmation of something he already believes about himself and his place in the world. Mo is one of the show's most consistently present supporting characters. He is in more episodes than almost anyone outside the main family. He is one of the few characters the show has given a genuine backstory to. Multiple genuine backstories, actually, which is part of the problem. Because Mo's backstories do not agree with each other, and the disagreement is not the casual inconsistency of a floating timeline applied to a minor character. The disagreement is structural. The show has told several different origin stories for Mo Sislak, and they are mutually exclusive in ways that suggest either profound carelessness or something more deliberate. Let us go through them. Origin Story 1. Mo was a child actor. This is established in Season 8, in the episode Bart After Dark. There are references in various episodes to a child named Mo who appeared in a television program or film. The character is Mo Sislak as a child, a young, innocent version of the man who would become the perpetually miserable bartender. This origin story does interesting work. It explains potentially Mo's particular relationship with fame and recognition. A man who was once visible, once watched, once the subject of an audience's attention, who has ended up in a bar serving beer to the same 4 people every night. The distance between those two states, between the child actor and the tavern keeper, is vast enough to explain a certain amount of bitterness. Enough to explain why Mo responds so poorly to being overlooked, to being the target of pranks, to being the person that Springfield treats as furniture. Origin Story 2. Mo was a professional boxer. This one is more firmly established across multiple episodes. Mo is shown to have genuine fighting skills. He has references in his vocabulary to boxing, to training, to the specific culture of the sport. In certain episodes, his past as a fighter is treated as common knowledge. He was a professional. He had a career in the ring. Something happened to that career, something ended it, and Mo ended up behind the bar. This origin story does different work. A former boxer who now pours drinks for other men's entertainment is a story about physical diminishment, about a man who was once defined by his body's ability to perform a specific kind of violence, and who now has nothing that his body is particularly good for. The bar becomes a kind of shelter for that diminished physical self, a place where the past glory can be remembered and the present circumstances do not require direct comparison. Origin Story 3. Mo is of ambiguous ethnic heritage, possibly from a fictional Eastern European country the show invented for the purpose, possibly from somewhere else entirely. His accent, which shifts occasionally between episodes, is never fully explained. His family background is referenced but never fixed. He has a mother who appears once and does not look quite like what you would expect from looking at Mo. This is not so much an origin story as a persistent ambiguity. The show never committed to where Mo comes from in any geographical or ethnic sense. He is from somewhere. That somewhere shaped him. But the somewhere is left undefined. Origin Story 4. Mo was involved with the mob, specifically with Fat Tony's organization, in some capacity that the show hints at across multiple episodes. His relationship with organized crime is never fully elaborated but is repeatedly gestured toward. He knows things he should not know. He has access to things that a regular bartender would not have access to. The bar itself is occasionally used for purposes that go beyond serving alcohol. These 4 origin stories do not fit together. A child actor who became a professional boxer who has mob connections and an indefinite ethnic background is not a coherent biographical through-line. It is 4 separate characters who have been assigned to the same body. The question is why? One answer is simply inconsistency. The show ran for 36 seasons and no one kept meticulous track of what was established about minor characters. Moe's backstory was invented fresh by each writing room as needed for each episode. The inconsistency is not meaningful. It is just noise. But here is the other answer, and it is the one that makes Moe more interesting rather than less. What if Moe does not have a fixed identity because Moe has deliberately obscured his fixed identity? The show, in its regular episodes, depicts Moe as someone who is intensely uncomfortable with scrutiny. He deflects personal questions. He redirects conversations away from himself. He is more comfortable discussing other people's problems, Homer's marriage, Barney's drinking, Lenny and Carl's relationship, than he is discussing his own. His prank call rage is always slightly disproportionate to the actual prank, which suggests that his anger is not really about the prank. It is about the feeling of being examined, of someone calling and demanding that he perform a specific kind of response, of being, even in joke form, the center of attention. A man who obscures his past has reasons for doing so. The reasons could be mundane, embarrassment, failure, a desire to start over in a new place with a new set of expectations, or the reasons could be more significant. A past that is worth hiding, a history that the present-day Moe has reasons not to want connected to the present-day Moe. The mob connection origin story is the one that makes most sense in this context. A man who had dealings with organized crime, who left that world for reasons that may not have been entirely his own choice, who set up a bar in Springfield where nobody particularly important would think to look for him, who maintains relationships with the kinds of people who do not ask too many questions because they have their own reasons for not asking too many questions. Barney, Homer, Lenny, Carl, none of these men are investigators. None of them are curious about Moe's past in any sustained way. They are content with the Moe they see because the Moe they see serves their purposes, which is primarily that he provides beer and a warm place to sit and someone who will listen to them complain. Moe chose his regulars carefully, consciously or not. He built a bar that attracts people who will not look too hard at the person behind the bar. This reading of Moe is supported by the one episode that deals most directly with who he might actually be. In the Season 5 episode Bart's Inner Child, Moe demonstrates a vulnerability that the show rarely gives him access to. He admits, in the context of a self-help seminar, that he is deeply unhappy. Not the surface unhappiness that he performs regularly, not the comedic misery of his prank call responses and his failed romantic attempts. A genuine, deep, structural unhappiness that he does not know how to fix and has not known how to fix for as long as he can remember. The show plays this for a laugh and moves on. But the moment is real, and the question it raises is real. What would it take to make Moe genuinely happy? What is it that he is missing? The answer the show gestures at most consistently is connection, authentic connection. Not the transactional warmth of the bar, where people come to him because he has something they want and stay because the beer is cheap, but the kind of connection where someone is there because of him, specifically, because of who he is rather than what he provides. Moe's failed romantic history is extensive and consistently heartbreaking in ways the show treats as comedy. He is not bad at romance because he is repulsive, though the show does sometimes play it that way. He is bad at romance because he does not know how to be seen. Every time someone gets close enough to see him clearly, he either pushes them away or they discover something that makes them leave. The precise nature of what they discover is always elusive. The show never specifies, but the pattern is consistent enough to suggest that there is something specific being avoided. A thing that Moe knows about himself and that he has learned through experience will end relationships if it becomes visible. A thing that the multiple contradictory origin stories might collectively be designed to obscure. There is one more element worth examining. Moe's bar has been destroyed multiple times over the course of the series. Burned, flooded, condemned, repurposed. Each time it has been rebuilt or restored, usually with Homer's help. And each time, Moe's response to its restoration is the same. Quiet, deep relief. Not just the relief of having his business back, but the relief of having his place back. His location, the specific geographic anchor that keeps him connected to the version of himself he has chosen to present to the world. A man who needs a specific place that specific way is a man who has nowhere else to go. Not literally, not necessarily, but psychologically. Moe's bar is the container for Moe's identity. Without it, he is a person with no coherent story to tell about himself, because the coherent story was constructed specifically for this location and does not travel well. The bar is not where Moe works, it is where Moe exists. And everything that happened before the bar, the child actor, the boxer, the mob connections, the unclear origins, is material from a life that Mo has already decided does not count. He has done what the Armin Tamzarian episode depicts. He has chosen a new identity and a new location and a new set of people to whom the old identity is invisible. He has voted to forget his own past and to make it, as much as possible, forget him. The prank calls fit this reading perfectly. Every call that Bart makes forces Mo to say a name, to perform a version of himself publicly, to become briefly the center of the bar's attention. The rage Mo feels is not about the embarrassment of the joke. It is about the intrusion. Someone has reached through the telephone and pulled him out of the background where he prefers to live. They have made him visible. They have made him perform. And the thing Mo is most afraid of is performance. Because performance means scrutiny, and scrutiny means the possibility that someone looks long enough and hard enough to see what is actually there. That fear is the most consistent thing about Mo Sieslak across 36 seasons of inconsistent origin stories. He is afraid of being seen. Every comedic bit, every failed date, every shouted threat into the telephone, every quiet moment of genuine despair, they all circle back to a man who has made himself invisible for reasons the show decided were better left as mystery. Number. Section 6. The Springfield Elementary Conspiracy. What is actually happening inside that school? Springfield Elementary School is one of the most consistently present locations in the entire series. Bart and Lisa attend it. Principal Skinner runs it, except for the years when Skinner was revealed to be Armin Tamzarian, and then he ran it again after the real Skinner was expelled from Springfield by judicial decree. The school has been destroyed, flooded, infested, temporarily converted into other facilities, condemned, and rebuilt so many times that the building itself seems to function on the same rules as Hans Moleman. It dies and comes back without explanation. But there is something about Springfield Elementary that the show has been suggesting for years that goes beyond the comedic chaos of the school's day-to-day operations. Something structural. Something about what the school is actually doing to the children inside it. Let us start with what the show has explicitly established. The school is chronically underfunded. This is depicted with enough detail and enough consistency across enough episodes that it functions as settled fact within the show's universe. The school lacks basic supplies. Teachers use their own money, when they have it, to provide materials for their classrooms. The curriculum is reduced, extracurricular programs are cut. The physical building is in a state of ongoing disrepair. The infrastructure of the school, the thing that is supposed to support children's development, is visibly failing. The reason it is underfunded is partially established and partially implied. Springfield, as a municipality, does not prioritize education. The tax base is controlled, to a significant degree, by Burns's power plant and the economic ecosystem it generates. Money that could go to public institutions frequently does not, because the political will to direct it there does not exist. Springfield's political class is either corrupt, incompetent, or both. And the school, which has no powerful advocate and no economic leverage, is one of the first things to suffer when resources are tight. This is the context into which Bart Simpson and Lisa Simpson and every other child in Springfield are placed for the first 12 years of their education. Now, look at what happens to them inside that context. Bart's educational experience at Springfield Elementary is one of the most sustained depictions of institutional failure in American television. The school looks at Bart and sees a problem. His energy is excessive. His attention is selective. His performance on standardized tests is poor in some areas and inexplicably excellent in others. He is the kind of student who makes a teacher's life difficult, not because he is unkind or genuinely obstructive, but because he does not fit the mold that the school's limited resources require him to fit. The show has repeatedly demonstrated that Bart's difficulties are environmental rather than inherent. When Bart is placed in a context that matches his actual learning style, he performs. The brief period in which he was placed in a higher-achieving class showed a child who was capable of sophisticated thinking and genuine academic engagement. The episode in which he bonds with a teacher who meets him where he actually is showed a student who could be reached by the right approach. The problem is that Springfield Elementary does not have the resources to provide the right approach. It has the approach it can afford, which is the standardized approach, and the standardized approach does not fit Bart. So Bart is classified as a failure and treated accordingly. And because the school treats him as a failure, And because Bart's own response to that treatment is to perform the failure that is expected of him, the classification becomes self-fulfilling. This is educational malpractice. It is not dramatic. It is not violent. It does not look like harm from the outside. But it is harm. A child with genuine capabilities is being processed through a system that cannot see those capabilities and is emerging from that system with a foundational belief that he is not capable. That belief will shape every subsequent choice he makes. The school did not cause Bart's future struggles, but it built the structure inside which those struggles will unfold. Lisa's educational experience is in some ways the mirror of Bart's, and in some ways even more troubling. Lisa is the school's success story. She is the student who performs, who achieves, who validates the school's existence as an educational institution. Her presence in Springfield Elementary's classrooms is the proof that the school can produce excellence. She is the exception that justifies the system. Except the system does almost nothing to produce Lisa's excellence. Lisa is excellent in spite of Springfield Elementary, not because of it. The teachers who shape her most significantly are almost all either temporary presences or operating outside the school's normal institutional frame. The substitute teacher she falls in love with in one episode, the music teacher who recognizes her musical gifts. The moments of genuine educational connection that the show depicts are moments where the institution's normal rules are briefly suspended. When the institution functions normally, Lisa is not educated, she is contained. She is given material she has already mastered and asked to demonstrate mastery of it while the school measures her against a standard she exceeded years ago. She is not challenged. She is not pushed. She is used as a data point. And the effect on Lisa is not neutral. The gap between her capabilities and what the school is actually providing becomes, over time, a source of her deepest frustration. She knows what she is capable of. She can see the distance between the education she is receiving and the education she could be receiving. And the school, which should be reducing that gap, is perfectly indifferent to it. But here is where it gets darker. And this is the element the show suggested rather than directly stated. In multiple episodes, Springfield Elementary is shown to have systems that seem designed less to educate children than to manage them. Not in the sinister sense of deliberate malevolence, but in the systemic sense of an institution that has lost track of its original purpose and replaced it with the purpose of maintaining itself. Principal Skinner, whether the real one or Armin Tamzarian, is primarily an administrator. His concerns are the school's metrics, its operational continuity, its relationship with the school board, its ability to function without being shut down or condemned. The children are the reason the school exists in formal terms, but they are not the priority of the school's actual decision-making. Superintendent Chalmers, who oversees Skinner and represents the school board, is even more transparently an administrator. His concern is whether the schools under his supervision are performing adequately by whatever metric the state requires. He is not concerned with whether children are learning. He is concerned with whether the numbers that represent children learning are sufficiently presentable. The system that these two men operate is a system that optimizes for its own survival, rather than for the benefit of the children it nominally serves. This is not unique to Springfield. It is a critique of educational bureaucracy that the show was making in the early 90s, and that is arguably more relevant now than it was then. But within Springfield's specific context, the critique has an additional layer, because Springfield Elementary is not just an underperforming school. It is an underperforming school in a contaminated environment, staffed by adults who have lived in that contaminated environment their entire lives, serving children who have been born into it and are being shaped by it in ways that neither the children nor the administrators can fully perceive. The radiation theory, applied to the school, produces an image that is genuinely troubling. A generation of children being educated inside a building that itself sits within the fallout zone of a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations, drinking the same contaminated water as their parents, breathing the same compromised air, and being taught by adults whose own cognitive function has been affected by decades of the same exposure. The teachers in Springfield Elementary are not malicious. They are doing what they can with what they have. But what they have is limited not just by funding and resources, but by the same environmental compromise that has been quietly reshaping everyone in Springfield for decades. A teacher whose neurological function has been affected by long-term radiation exposure may not be able to teach at the level they could have taught in a different environment. The gap between their potential and their actual performance mirrors the gap the show depicts in every adult in Springfield. The gap between who they could have been and who they actually are. The children being educated by these teachers in this building are not receiving the education they would receive in a different environment. They are receiving a damaged version of education, delivered by damaged teachers in a damaged institution in a damaged town. And the damage is invisible because everyone inside the system is subject to the same damage. There is no clean baseline to compare against. There is just the level of performance that everyone in Springfield has come to accept as normal, because normal is whatever is consistent, and the contamination has been consistent for so long that it has become indistinguishable from baseline. This is what Springfield Elementary is, an institution that reflects and reproduces the conditions of the environment it exists within. A school that cannot educate its children properly not because its teachers are lazy or its administrators are uniquely incompetent, but because the town it serves has been systematically compromised in ways that the school has no mechanism for addressing. Bart failing in this school is not a story about Bart's limitations. It is a story about a system that would fail Bart even if Bart had no limitations. Lisa succeeding in this school is not a story about Lisa's superiority. It is a story about a child who is exceptional enough to succeed in spite of the system, which says nothing good about the system and everything remarkable about Lisa. And both of them will emerge from 12 years in this building carrying something they cannot quite name. The accumulated effect of an education that was always slightly not quite enough, that always gestured towards something it could not quite deliver. That gave them the outlines of things without quite managing the substance. That is Springfield Elementary's real legacy. The outlines of an education. The shape of development without the development itself. Children who know that they should know more than they do, who feel the gap without being able to identify its source, who carry through their adult lives the faint, inarticulate sense of something missing. And the school will be there next week. The same building, the same administrators, the same curriculum, ready to do the same thing to the next generation. Number. Section 7. Krusty the Clown's shadow life, the man behind the grease paint, and what he sold to get there. Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krustovsky. That is Krusty the Clown's real name. The show reveals it at various points, and it is worth sitting with because it is doing a lot of work. Each element of that name is from a specific tradition, a specific culture, a specific set of expectations about what a person from that background becomes. A name like that carries the weight of a particular kind of family, a particular kind of community, a particular set of obligations. Krusty has spent his entire professional life running from that name, from the weight of it, from what it represents. He became Krusty the Clown, a name with no history, no cultural weight, no obligations attached, a name you can hide inside, a name that says nothing about where you came from and everything about what you chose to become instead. The relationship between Krusty and his father, Rabbi Hyman Krustovsky, is one of the show's most carefully constructed emotional threads. It is introduced in Season 3, in the episode Like Father, Like Clown, and it is the episode that takes Krusty most seriously as a character. The comedy is still there, but underneath it is a genuine portrait of a man carrying an estrangement that has lasted decades and that has shaped everything about who he is. Rabbi Krustovsky, who is voiced by Jackie Mason in what amounts to a career-defining supporting performance, is a man who wanted his son to follow him into the rabbinate, who had a vision of his son's life that his son could not inhabit. When Herschel chose comedy over religion, chose entertainment over the tradition his father had devoted himself to, Rabbi Krustovsky sat Shiva for him. He performed the ritual of mourning for a living child. He declared his son dead to him. This is an extreme response. The show treats it with enough nuance to suggest that it knows it is an extreme response. Rabbi Krustovsky is not a villain. He is a man who believed deeply in something and who experienced his son's rejection of that thing as a personal and theological catastrophe. He was wrong in the show's moral framing to respond as he did, but the show understands why he responded that way, and it communicates that understanding without either excusing the harm or reducing the father to a cartoon of religious rigidity. The estrangement lasted decades. Krusty grew up professionally, became famous, became rich, became the kind of entertainer that children across Springfield grew up watching, and he did all of it while carrying the weight of a father who had declared him dead. Every performance, every piece of merchandise, every day of the Krusty the Clown show was happening in the shadow of that estrangement. And here's the thing about Krusty that the reconciliation episode reveals. He never actually left. He never moved on. He dressed like a clown and made children laugh and became a Springfield institution. And underneath all of it, he was still Herschel Krustofsky, still his father's son, still living inside the unresolved wound of that Shiva. The reconciliation, brokered by Bart and Lisa, is genuinely moving. The show earns the emotional payoff because it spent the entire episode establishing what was actually at stake. This is not a misunderstanding that can be resolved by a clever speech. This is a father and son separated by genuine philosophical difference, by real competing values, by years of accumulated hurt on both sides. The reconciliation does not erase all of that. It opens a door that had been sealed. But here is what the show never quite examines. What did the estrangement produce in Krusty, the performer? Krusty the Clown is an entertainer who does not particularly like entertaining. This is established so consistently across the series that it has to be intentional. He phones in performances. He relies on old material. He is indifferent to the quality of his show as long as the check's clear. He is more engaged by his gambling debts and his failed love affairs and his dietary habits than he is by any aspect of his actual work. This is not burnout. Burnout is what happens when someone who once loved something loses the ability to access that love. Krusty was never particularly in love with the work. He chose performance as an act of rebellion, not as a vocation. He did not become a clown because clowning was what he could not help being. He became a clown because being a clown was the thing his father could not bear. The performance was always primarily a statement about the relationship. I am not what you wanted me to be. I am this instead. The work itself was secondary to the statement the work was making. And you cannot build a career on a statement. You can start a career on one. You can find an audience and develop skills and establish yourself. But the thing that sustains a career across decades, the thing that keeps a performer connected to the work when the novelty has long since worn off, is love for the work itself. Is the sense that the work matters regardless of what anyone else thinks about it? Krusty does not have that. He never had that. And so his career, which is vast and successful by any external measure, is hollow at the center. The audience watches a man performing the motions of entertainment without the spirit of it. Children laugh because the material is calibrated to make them laugh. Not because Krusty is genuinely channeling something. It is competence without conviction, craft without care. The one exception, and it is a significant one, is when Krusty performs for the audience in his father's synagogue. The episode in which he returns to his community, in which he stands before the congregation and does his act for people who knew him as Herschel before they knew him as Krusty, is the only episode in which his performance seems genuinely alive. He connects, he engages. He finds something in the room that he cannot find on his regular stage. The conclusion the episode implicitly draws is obvious but worth stating. The audience Krusty actually wants to perform for is his father's audience. The approval he has been chasing across decades of merchandising and broadcast deals and celebrity is the approval of the man who declared him dead. Every other audience is a substitute, and nothing substitutes fully enough. But there is another layer to Krusty's shadow life that the show raised and then let sit without fully developing. In multiple episodes, the show depicts Krusty as someone who has done things he cannot easily reconcile with the public persona he maintains. He owes money to people who collect debts violently. He has business associations that his lawyers would prefer not to discuss. He has, on at least one occasion, been involved in transactions that were not strictly legal and that were covered up through a combination of money and the specific kind of influence that celebrity provides. The show treats these as character color. Krusty is a flawed man who makes bad decisions. The debts and the associations are the predictable consequences of those bad decisions. Nothing to investigate too closely. But taken together, they suggest a Krusty who has been operating in two registers for his entire career. The public Krusty, beloved children's entertainer, Springfield institution. The man who shapes the cultural imagination of an entire generation of Springfield children. And the private Krusty, making deals and acquiring debts and maintaining relationships that the public persona would not survive if they were known. This is not a unique situation. Many public figures maintain the gap between their public and private selves. But in Krusty's case, the gap has a particular meaning. Because the public persona was always a costume, Krusty was always Herschel underneath. The distance between Krusty the Clown and Herschel Krustofsky was always there. always visible to anyone who looked, always the thing his father was mourning when he sat Shiva. The private associations, the debts, the things Krusty does when the cameras are off, are not the real Krusty either. They are what happens when a man who is performing a persona he does not believe in encounters the ordinary pressures of life. When the costume is not sufficient protection against the things that happen when you make bad choices and need resources to manage the consequences. The real Krusty, the one who neither public image captures, might be the man who shows up briefly when he is in his father's synagogue. The man who has spent his entire career running from one identity and has never quite found another one to run to. The man who is, in some fundamental sense, still waiting for his life to begin. There is a version of Krusty's story that the show has been circling for 36 years without landing on. The story of what happens when you build an entire life as a rejection of something rather than as an embrace of something. When the statement you are making with your choices precedes and overshadows the choices themselves. When the costume becomes so familiar that you forget it is a costume, and when you forget it is a costume, you lose the ability to find out who you are underneath it. Krusty still wears the grease paint. He will always wear the grease paint, because taking it off would require knowing what is there without it, and that is the question he has been avoiding since the day he put it on. Number. Section 8. The secondary characters who shouldn't exist. Springfield's impossible population. Springfield has a population problem. Not in the demographic sense, though the radiation theory has thoughts on that as well. The problem is a specific and peculiar one. Springfield's population includes a significant number of characters who, when you examine them closely, should not be there. Characters whose presence in the town raises questions the show has never found it necessary to answer. Characters who, like the skeletons in the power plant's basement, are shown to you and then quietly moved past. Let us start with Fat Tony. Fat Tony is Springfield's mob boss. He has been present in the show since Season 3. And his presence is one of the things that makes Springfield stranger than it initially appears, because Fat Tony's operation is not a small-scale local criminal enterprise. He is connected. He runs a genuine organized crime operation with real resources, real reach, and real consequences for people who fail to pay what they owe. This raises questions about Springfield that the show never directly addresses. A fully operational mob presence requires a certain kind of environment to function within. It requires a sufficient volume of criminal economic activity to make the operation profitable. It requires a level of institutional corruption in law enforcement and local government that allows the operation to persist without being dismantled. It requires a community large enough and economically active enough to generate the flow of money and goods that organized crime runs on. Springfield is, nominally, a medium-sized American town. The show is not entirely consistent about its size, but it is not depicted as a major metropolitan area. It does not have the scale that would normally support Fat Tony's level of operation. And yet, the operation exists. And Fat Tony is a recurring character who appears in season after season without anyone questioning why a town of Springfield's apparent size has a mob boss of Fat Tony's apparent stature. The show does gesture at an explanation in the Fat Tony episodes that examine his personal life. Fat Tony has a son. He has obligations to a community that extends beyond Springfield. He has business interests that the show implies go considerably further than the borders of whatever state Springfield is nominally located in. But this raises, rather than resolves, the question: if Fat Tony's operation extends beyond Springfield, what is Springfield to him? It is not big enough to be his base of operations in any strategic sense. It is too small to be worth the institutional investment that a genuine organized crime presence represents, unless Springfield has something that other towns do not have. Unless there is something about this specific location that makes it worth maintaining a presence there. The radiation theory offers one answer. A town whose population has been neurologically compromised by decades of environmental contamination is a town whose residents are easier to exploit. A population with diminished critical thinking capacity, with damaged ability to assess risk and coordinate resistance, with a tendency to forget and reset and accept whatever the current situation presents as normal, is an easier target than a population functioning at full capacity. Fat Tony does not need Springfield to be large. He needs it to be pliable. And Springfield's contaminated population has been made pliable by the same process that keeps Burns's power plant running without regulatory interference. Now let us consider Dr. Nick Riviera. Dr. Nick is the show's most flagrant comedy character in the medical professional space. He is incompetent in ways that are played entirely for laughs. He does not know basic anatomy. He performs procedures he is not qualified for. His operating theater is not sterile. His diagnostic process involves guessing more than it involves actual diagnosis. And yet people go to him. People in Springfield choose Dr. Nick when they need medical care, either because Hibbert is unavailable or unaffordable, or because they have, over time, normalized Dr. Nick's level of care to the point where it registers as acceptable. This is the detail the show treats as comedy, but that has genuinely dark implications. If Springfield's population has been conditioned, whether by radiation or by the collective denial mechanism, to accept a level of medical care that is objectively dangerous, then Dr. Nick is not just a joke. He is a symptom. He is the medical system that a compromised population deserves, which is to say the medical system that a population too damaged to demand better has ended up with. The fact that Dr. Nick continues to practice medicine in Springfield, that he has a building and patients and, presumably some form of state license, tells you something about how deeply the institutional failures in Springfield run. This is not an accident. This is the equilibrium that the town has arrived at, a medical system as broken as its patients, and patients too broken to recognize that their medical system is broken. Consider Disco Stu. Disco Stu is a minor character, primarily comedic, defined almost entirely by his commitment to 1970s disco culture, in an era that has moved on from it. He wears the clothes. He speaks the language. He DJs occasionally in venues that will have him. He is an anachronism, a human fossil, a man who decided that 1977 was the apex of human cultural achievement and has been living there ever since. The show treats this as a harmless quirk, a funny bit, the guy who likes disco too much. But sit with it for a moment. A man who cannot update his cultural relationship with time, who is frozen in a specific era, culturally speaking, in the same way that the Simpson family is frozen in their ages, who has found a specific cultural moment and refused to allow the passage of time to move him from it. This is exactly what the radiation theory would predict about a population whose relationship with time has been disrupted. Some of them freeze in ages, some of them freeze in eras, some of them freeze in roles, like the safety inspector who never stops making mistakes. The form the freezing takes varies. The underlying mechanism might be the same. Disco Stu is a minor character. He is played for comedy, but he is also potentially the most explicit example of the temporal disruption that affects every resident of Springfield in ways that are normally less visible. Now consider Professor Frink. Professor John Frink is Springfield's resident scientific genius. He is depicted as having genuine, extraordinary scientific ability. His inventions work, at least initially. His research is legitimate. He is, by any measure, an exceptionally talented scientist who has produced significant intellectual work. He lives in Springfield. Think about what it means to be a scientist of Frink's caliber in Springfield. His access to research infrastructure is presumably limited. His colleagues are presumably not operating at his level. The institutional support for serious scientific work in a medium-sized town with a chronically underfunded school system is presumably inadequate. And yet, here he is, episode after episode, in Springfield, occasionally attending town meetings, occasionally appearing at Homer's house with a device that will solve the episode's central problem, living a life that is domestically integrated into a community that cannot possibly provide the intellectual environment his work should require. Why is he there? Why is someone of Frink's abilities in Springfield when there are research universities, government laboratories, private research facilities, places where the work he does would be supported, rewarded, published, taken seriously? The show never answers this. Frink is in Springfield because Springfield needs a scientist character. The narrative logic is circular. He is there because he is there. But the question of what keeps a person of his capabilities tethered to a town that can offer him almost nothing professionally is genuinely interesting. One answer, consistent with the radiation theory, is that Frink cannot leave. That whatever the contamination does to people, it does something that makes departure feel impossible. That the cognitive effects of long-term exposure include a particular kind of attachment to the specific geography of the exposure, a psychic anchoring that makes leaving feel more difficult than the observable conditions would warrant. Another answer, consistent with the coma theory, is that Frink is a character Homer invented because Homer needed a scientist in his dream. Someone who could be called upon to provide technological solutions to narrative problems. Homer's unconscious mind, generating Springfield from memory and ambient stimuli, created Frink because the dream required a person who could do things that none of Homer's actual acquaintances could do. A third answer is the one that sits underneath both of those and does not require any theory to be operative. Frink is in Springfield because Springfield is home. Because the fact that a place cannot offer you what your work requires does not automatically cancel the fact that it is the place you are from, the place that shaped you, the place where your particular kind of strangeness found enough tolerance to take root and keep growing. This third answer is, arguably, the most human one. And it connects Frink to every other person in Springfield who is more than their environment should have produced and who has stayed anyway. Lisa is the most prominent example, but she is not the only one. Springfield contains, beneath its surface of institutional failure and environmental contamination, people who are genuinely extraordinary. People who should, by any rational assessment, have found better circumstances long ago. They are still there, all of them, in the same houses, the same jobs, the same town. And the question of why is the question that runs underneath every other question the show has ever raised. Number. Section 9. Lisa Simpson's psychological collapse, the weight of being the only one who sees. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. She is the most brilliant person in her family, arguably the most brilliant person in Springfield, and she has spent 36 years being systematically ignored, dismissed, condescended to, and failed by every institution and most of the individuals her environment has provided. And she keeps going. Episode after episode, she wakes up, she plays her saxophone, she goes to school, she identifies the injustice or the environmental problem or the intellectual dishonesty of the week, she attempts to address it, she is usually thwarted, and she goes to bed still 8 years old and wakes up and does it again. The question the show has been asking since its first season, without ever quite articulating it directly, is, how long can someone do that before something in them breaks? The answer the show's format provides is, forever. Lisa can do it forever, because the floating timeline means she never accumulates fatigue. She does not carry the weight of last episode's defeat into this episode. She resets. She wakes up ready to try again because the dream, or the radiation, or the collective denial, or the simple mechanics of episodic television has erased the specific weight of the previous attempt. But if you watch the series in sequence, if you pay attention to the pattern across seasons rather than treating each episode as its own contained unit, something becomes visible that the show cannot quite acknowledge within its own format. Lisa is getting sadder. Not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself. The comedy is still there. Her wit is still sharp. Her intellectual engagement is still present. But underneath those things, in the accumulation of episodes across decades, there is a deepening. A weight that was not there in the early seasons, or was there in a more manageable form, that has grown heavier as the show has continued. The early Lisa was a character defined by hope as much as by intelligence. She was the idealistic 8-year-old who believed that the right argument, made clearly enough and passionately enough to the right people, could change things. She had causes and she pursued them with genuine conviction. Not just that the causes were right, but that pursuing them could lead somewhere. The later Lisa is more complicated. The convictions are still there, the causes are still there, but something has changed in how she holds them. There is a quality in the later season Lisa episodes that was not present in the early seasons. A quality of going through the motions, of knowing at some level that this week's effort will end where last week's ended. That Springfield will be Springfield next week regardless of what she does this week. That the system she is pushing against has absorbed every previous push and has remained entirely itself. This is not quite cynicism. Lisa cannot afford cynicism, because cynicism would require her to acknowledge that her efforts are futile. And acknowledging that her efforts are futile would require her to stop making them, and stopping would mean becoming something she has no template for. She does not know who she is without the effort, so she continues. But the quality of the continuation has changed. It is more effortful, more maintained, more the product of will than of genuine hope. Examine the episodes in which Lisa's psychological state is most directly addressed. The episode where she loses her faith. The episode where she considers compromising her integrity for social acceptance. The episodes in which she confronts the gap between what she believes the world should be and what she observes it actually being. In each of these episodes, the show gives her a resolution. She finds her way back to her values. She chooses integrity over acceptance. She reconstitutes her belief system after challenging it. But the resolutions are always slightly costly. She finds her way back, but the path back is slightly longer each time. The recovery takes slightly more work. The confidence that the values will hold is slightly less absolute. This is the cumulative effect that the episodic format cannot officially acknowledge, but that is nonetheless visible if you are watching for it. Lisa is running a sustained deficit. She is spending more than she is recovering. The hope that makes her function is being drawn down, slowly, by the accumulation of resistance and failure and the specific, grinding exhaustion of being the only person in the room who can see something clearly and being constitutionally incapable of stopping seeing it. There is a theory about Lisa that the show has supported in fragments across its run without ever assembling the fragments into a complete argument. The theory is that Lisa's situation in Springfield is not just unfortunate. It is not just the specific bad luck of an unusually intelligent child being born into an unusually limited environment. It is, in some sense, designed. Not designed by Burns, though the radiation theory offers one route to that conclusion. Not designed by any specific malevolent actor, but designed by the logic of Springfield itself, by the equilibrium the town has settled into, by the collective agreement, the one that the principal and the pauper episode makes explicit, to maintain the status quo against all challenges to it. Lisa is Springfield's greatest challenge to its own status quo. She is the person who sees clearly, who cannot be bought or frightened or cognitively compromised into not seeing clearly. Who will stand up in public and say, "Look at this three-eyed fish. Look at these four fingers. Look at this man who has been alive for over a century," and ask the question that none of you have asked? Springfield's response to Lisa is not to silence her violently. It is gentler and more effective than that. Springfield simply does not respond. It absorbs her challenges and continues. It lets her speak and then moves on without changing. It gives her the experience of being heard without giving her any of the outcomes that would justify the hearing. This is more effective than suppression because it does not create a martyr. A silenced Lisa would be a Lisa with obvious evidence of persecution, a Lisa whose cause would be advanced by the fact of her silencing. A Lisa who is heard and ignored is a Lisa who has to face the possibility that she is wrong, or that being right is not sufficient, or that the world she is living in simply does not have a mechanism for processing the kind of information she is providing. The show offers glimpses of what Lisa's future looks like if this continues. The Season 6 flash-forward to Lisa's wedding shows a young adult Lisa who has achieved academic distinction and professional promise, and who is nonetheless visibly lonely. Who has found a partner from a different cultural background, partly because he is capable of seeing her clearly in a way that Springfield never managed, but who is still carrying the weight of her family, of her hometown, of the accumulated experience of being the person who sees what others cannot, and who has spent her entire life not knowing what to do with that. That Lisa, the adult Lisa, is in some ways more coherent than the 8-year-old Lisa because she has arrived at something. She has found contexts in which her intelligence is valued. She has made choices about the life she wants to build. But she is not happy in the uncomplicated way that a person who has been fully recognized and fully rewarded for their gifts should be happy. She is functional. She is accomplished. She is doing well by external measures. She is also, clearly, still carrying something she cannot put down. What she is carrying is the weight of having spent her formative years in a place that saw her clearly enough to know what she was and not clearly enough to know what to do with what she was. Springfield loved Lisa in the abstract and failed her in the particular, every week for 12 years of her childhood. That is the specific shape of the wound. Not cruelty, not neglect, but the particular hurt of being loved without being seen, of being appreciated without being known, of growing up in a room full of people who were proud of you without quite understanding what they were proud of. Lisa will carry that wound into whatever her adult life becomes. And the show, which cannot let her age, which cannot show us the adult she will be except in glimpses that it immediately retracts, is perpetually keeping her in the moment of the wound's formation, never letting it heal, never letting it calcify into something she has processed and moved beyond. Just holding her there, at 8 years old, in the environment that is shaping the wound, week after week, indefinitely. That is, when you think about it, one of the most quietly cruel things a television show has ever done to a character it claims to love. The show does love Lisa. You can feel it in the episodes that treat her most carefully, in the saxophone moments, in the moments when her intelligence is allowed to be the solution rather than the problem, in the genuine care that the best writers have brought to her over the decades. The show knows what Lisa is and it values what Lisa is. It is just that the format it exists within prevents it from doing right by her. The floating timeline, which keeps Bart from growing and Homer from aging and the town from changing, also keeps Lisa in the specific moment of her greatest vulnerability. 8 years old, brilliant, isolated, and trying. The saddest episode involving Lisa is not any of the explicitly emotional ones. It is not the episode about her faith or the episode about her self-esteem or the episode about her saxophone teacher. The saddest episode involving Lisa is whichever one is airing right now, the most recent one, the latest installment in an infinite series of episodes in which Lisa Simpson wakes up 8 years old and tries again. Because it is still the same morning. It will always be the same morning, and Lisa will always be trying. Number, Section 10. The Simpsons Universe Time Paradox. What 36 years of stories has actually built? We have spent a great deal of time in Springfield. We have gone into the corners that the big theories do not quite reach. We have looked at characters the show built carefully and then left incomplete. We have followed threads that lead to places the show never quite arrived at. Now let us pull back. Let us look at the whole thing from a distance and ask what 36 years of stories has actually built, not in terms of the show's cultural impact, which is enormous and extensively documented, but in terms of the specific fictional universe that has accumulated across nearly 800 episodes, because something genuinely unusual has happened with The Simpsons. Something that has not happened with any other television show in the history of the medium, not at this scale, not across this duration. The show has built a mythology, not intentionally. Not in the way that science fiction franchises build mythologies, with Bibles and rules and canon keepers and continuity consultants. The Simpsons built its mythology accidentally through accumulation. Through 36 years of episodes written by hundreds of different writers across dozens of different writing staffs, each group building on what came before, each group adding something new, each group leaving things unresolved that the next group would either address or quietly step around. The result is a fictional universe that has more internal complexity than almost any other fictional universe in American pop culture. More layers, more contradictions, more buried threads, more characters with unexplored depths, more episodes that raise questions they do not answer, more moments that mean something if you are paying attention, that accumulate across decades into patterns that no single person planned. This is not the same as good writing. Good writing is intentional. It knows where it is going. It plants things that it intends to pay off. The Simpsons mythology was built without those intentions. It was built sideways, accidentally, by people who were trying to make a funny television show and in the process of making it funny, ended up making it deep. The depth is real, but it is also fragile. It is the depth of a coral reef built by millions of individual polyps over centuries, rather than the depth of a skyscraper designed by a single architect. The structure is genuinely complex. The patterns are genuinely there. But the patterns were not designed. They emerged. And this means that the questions the show raises, the mysteries we have been discussing for 4 hours, are not questions the show knew it was asking when it asked them. They are questions that emerged from the accumulation. From the coral reef logic of an enormous creative enterprise building on itself across time, this is part of what makes the fan theories so compelling and so endlessly debatable. The theories are trying to impose intentionality on something that was not built with that kind of intentionality. They are trying to read the coral reef as if it were a skyscraper. And the reef does reward that reading, in places, because some of the individual polyps were intentional. Some of the writers were planting things deliberately. Some of the patterns were designed. But the overall structure was not, and so the theories are partly right and partly wrong, and perpetually insufficient, because the thing they are trying to explain is larger and stranger and less structured than any single explanation can encompass. The Homer coma theory explains certain things elegantly and leaves other things unexplained. The radiation theory covers enormous amounts of evidence and runs into corners where the evidence contradicts it. The collective denial theory captures something essential about how Springfield works, but cannot account for the episodes in which Springfield does not work that way. Every theory is partial because the thing it is theorizing about is genuinely too large for any single explanation. What we have after 36 years is not a mystery to be solved. It is a mythology to be inhabited. This is actually the more interesting thing. A mystery to be solved has a correct answer. You either get the answer or you do not. A mythology to be inhabited is something different. It is a world with enough internal density that you can live in it, move around in it, find new things every time you come back to it, argue about its meaning without either argument being definitively wrong. Springfield is the second kind of thing. It is a mythology, and the mysteries we have been discussing tonight are not puzzles waiting for solutions. They are rooms in a structure that was never quite finished. You can explore them, you can map them, you can develop a theory about what they were meant to contain. But they were never quite closed off, which means they are still open, still accessible, still capable of meaning new things depending on who is looking at them and when. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are still running. Sideshow Bob is still planning. Bart is still 10 and Lisa is still 8 and Maggie is still watching with those eyes that see everything and say nothing. Mo is still behind the bar. Ned is still performing goodness for an audience that does not know they are watching a performance. Krusty is still in the grease paint. Professor Frink is still in Springfield when he should have left decades ago. And Homer Simpson is either dreaming in a hospital bed in 1993, or waking up to another day in the contamination zone, or living inside a loop that Springfield's collective denial has agreed to maintain, or all three simultaneously, or none of them, or something else entirely that no theory has yet found language for. The show will not tell you. It never told you. It has been running for 36 years, and every time it comes close to telling you, it turns the corner and finds another hallway and another room and another question sitting in the corner waiting to be discovered. This is what The Simpsons built. Not a mystery, not a mythology in the designed sense, something stranger and more particular, a world with enough weight to sustain examination. A world that rewards the kind of attention most people give to real things rather than fictional ones. A world in which the questions matter even if the answers never come. There are two ways to feel about that. One is frustration. 36 years and the fish still has 3 eyes, and nobody has asked the question that the 3-eyed fish is asking. 36 years and Bart is still on the skateboard, and Lisa is still in the 2nd grade, and Homer is still pressing that button in Sector 7G, and the plant is still leaking, and Burns is still alive, and the town is still forgetting everything it should remember. The other way to feel about it is something closer to comfort. Because the things that do not resolve, do not end. And Springfield's most important quality, the quality that all of the theories are circling, even when they address other things, is that it does not end. The loop persists, the family stays together, the house on Evergreen Terrace keeps its lights on, and every Sunday, if the show is still running, you can go back. You can be there again. You can watch Homer fall off something and bounce back up. You can watch Lisa play her saxophone in a moment of solitary beauty that the rest of the world is too busy to notice. You can watch Bart smirk at something that would make a reasonable person despair and find the grin infuriating and somehow consoling in equal measure. You can watch Maggie watch everything and wonder, the way you always wonder, what she sees that the rest of them have missed, what she is waiting for, what she is preparing for, whether the day will come when she decides that the preparation is complete. Springfield will not tell you, but it will show you, week after week, season after season, for as long as the show runs and longer after it stops, in the reruns and the streaming libraries, and the cultural memory of everyone who grew up watching the family drive home at the end of the opening credits and pile onto the couch together. The family is still on the couch. It will always be on the couch. That is the last mystery, the biggest one. The one sitting underneath every theory and every buried storyline and every 3-eyed fish and every possible interpretation of who shot Mr. Burns and every reading of Maggie's silence and every question about where exactly Springfield is on a map that will never quite resolve. Why is it still going? And the answer, which is also not quite an answer, is that it is still going because we are still watching. Because we built the loop together. The writers and the audience and the 36 years and the floating timeline and everything that accumulated in that time. Because the loop is not a prison the show built for the characters. It is a home the show built for us. A place where certain things do not change because certain things should not change. Because the couch and the television and the family and the house and the town and the impossibly persistent yellow faces are the landmarks of a specific kind of American life that we recognize even if we never lived it, that we mourn even if we still have it, that we hold on to with the particular desperation of people who know that the real version of this thing is fragile in ways that Springfield is not. Springfield is not fragile. Springfield is permanent. Springfield will be there when we come back. 36 years. Nearly 800 episodes. The longest-running animated series in American history. And the mysteries are still there, in every frame, in every episode, in every character who was built with more care than the comedy required, and who has been waiting ever since for someone to look closely enough to see what is there. Look closely. Springfield will wait. Number, bonus section 1. The Barney Gumble Erasure, Springfield's most wasted character. Barney Gumble attended Springfield University with Homer Simpson. The show establishes this in a flashback. Barney and Homer were contemporaries as undergraduates, which means that Barney, like Homer, had the basic capability required to gain admission to a university. That is not nothing. Whatever Barney's intellectual capacity, it was sufficient to get him into higher education. Then Homer introduced Barney to beer. The show treats this origin story partly as comedy and partly as something darker. The specific moment, Homer handing Barney his first beer on the day of an important exam, is the hinge point of Barney's life. Before that moment, he was a person with prospects. After it, he became what Springfield knows him as, the town drunk, the man who is almost always at Moe's, who is rarely entirely sober, who participates in the social life of the bar with a kind of enthusiastic loyalty that is both touching and quietly devastating. The show has done two things with Barney's alcoholism across its run. It has played it for comedy, extensively, and it has occasionally pivoted to playing it as tragedy. The comedy is familiar. Barney's belches, Barney's falls, Barney's periodic attempts to get involved in things that his condition makes him unsuited for. The comedy is not cruel exactly, but it is comfortable in a way that real alcoholism is not comfortable, which is part of what makes it comedy. The show has made Barney's drinking digestible by making it funny, by making it a character trait rather than a disease, by presenting his relationship with alcohol as a stylistic choice rather than a compulsion. The tragedy breaks through occasionally, and when it does, it is genuinely affecting. The most significant example is in the season 11 episode Days of Wine and Dioses, in which Barney sobers up. He goes through the process, he attends meetings, he develops new coping mechanisms. He finds that sobriety gives him access to abilities he did not know he had, specifically a talent for helicopter piloting that emerges once the constant fog of intoxication is lifted. He becomes briefly a version of himself that suggests what he could have been if the beer had never happened, or if Homer had not been there on that specific day with that specific drink. The episode is excellent, but what makes it interesting in retrospect is what the show did with it afterward. Barney does not stay sober. He picks up drinking again. The episode in which he sobered up becomes a data point rather than a turning point. The show returns to Barney the drunk because Barney the drunk is the Barney that Springfield needs. He is the character that slot in the ensemble is built around. Changing him permanently would require changing the ensemble. There is something worth sitting with in the trajectory of Barney's sobriety episode. When he is sober, he discovers talent. He discovers capability. He discovers that there is a person inside him who is good at things, who can engage with the world with clarity and effectiveness, who has skills that the years of drinking had been suppressing. This connects to the crayon in Homer's brain episode, to the radiation theory, to the broader pattern of Springfield characters whose potential has been suppressed by something, an environmental factor, a traumatic event, a substance, a behavioral modification, a family system that could not accommodate who they actually were. Barney's suppression was a beer can handed to him by his best friend on the day of an exam 30-something years ago. The mechanism differs from Homer's crayon, but the shape of it is similar. A person who could have been more than they became, held back by something that the show treats as fixed. Homer's crayon went back in, Barney went back to drinking, the show returned to the arrangement it was comfortable with and moved on. The glimpse of who these characters could be without their suppression is offered and then retracted. The question the show never quite answers is whether the suppression is chosen or imposed. Homer chose to put the crayon back because intelligence made Springfield unbearable. Did Barney choose to drink again for a similar reason? Was the sober version of Barney, with his helicopter skills and his clear eyes and his access to his own potential, too uncomfortable to sustain in Springfield? Did being functional in a town that rewards dysfunction create a kind of alienation that drinking resolved? The show does not say. It brings Barney back to the bar and continues as before. But the question is there, sitting in the room with all the other questions Springfield never quite answers. Barney Gumble was someone before Homer handed him that beer. The show told you that once. And then it kept him at the bar, episode after episode, as if the disclosure of that other Barney had not changed anything about how we should understand the man we see. As if knowing what someone could have been does not make seeing what they became more specifically painful. It does, and Springfield knows it does. And it keeps showing you anyway. Number, bonus. Section 2. The Lenny and Carl Problem 2, Men and 36 Years of Suggestion. Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson are Homer's co-workers and his closest friends outside the family. They are nearly always together. They share screen time, they share sensibility, they share the specific kind of uncomplicated warmth that the show assigns to people in Homer's orbit who are neither villains nor plot devices. They are good people. They are good friends. They are good to Homer in the ways that Homer's particular kind of neediness requires. They are also one of the show's longest-running unresolved suggestions. The suggestion that Lenny and Carl are not just best friends. That the relationship between them is something the show has been quietly gesturing at for 3 decades without ever committing to directly. The evidence is in the episodes, rather than in the writer's stated intentions. Numerous episodes contain moments between Lenny and Carl that exceed what the show normally depicts between male friends. Moments of genuine tenderness. Moments in which one of them says something about the other that is slightly more than friendship. That carries a weight the show does not quite acknowledge with its dialogue or its framing, but that is nonetheless present in the moment. The show is not alone in having done this kind of thing. Television has a long history of depicting significant relationships between characters in ways that stop just short of explicit acknowledgement, keeping the suggestion alive without ever resolving it, letting the audience read the relationship as they choose while never committing to either reading. It is a technique that has been criticized, reasonably, as a way of having it both ways. Of gesturing toward representation without taking the risk of actual representation. Whether the Lenny and Carl situation falls into this category, or is simply the genuine closeness of 2 lifelong best friends being misread by an audience looking for subtext, is something the show has never clarified. The writers have addressed it in various interviews over the years, with a combination of deliberate ambiguity and genuine affection for the characters, neither confirming nor denying, maintaining the uncertainty that the show itself maintains. What is true, regardless of how you read the relationship, is that Lenny and Carl represent one of the show's most consistently positive depictions of male friendship. Their dynamic is one of genuine mutual respect and care. They take each other seriously. They show up for each other. They have, in various episodes, demonstrated the kind of loyalty and attention that the show often restricts to romantic partnerships. Whatever the specific nature of that relationship, it has produced 2 characters who are among the most stable emotional presences in Springfield, who have not been twisted by ambition the way Burns has been twisted, have not been shaped by trauma the way Homer has been shaped, have not been modified by behavioral conditioning the way Ned has been modified. Lenny and Carl are, within the Springfield ecosystem, relatively whole, relatively functioning, relatively able to access something like genuine contentment. This might be the show's most radical suggestion. Not that they are a couple, that is the surface suggestion. The deeper suggestion is that the specific combination of genuine connection and mutual acceptance that they embody is what makes it possible to live in Springfield without being completely destroyed by it. That the protective factor against Springfield's various corrosive elements is not intelligence or faith or proximity to power, but the simple fact of having someone who sees you clearly and stays anyway. Homer has Marge, and that functions similarly. Ned had Maude and lost her. Barney had no one, and look at what that produced. Lenny and Carl have each other, and they are, by Springfield standards, relatively okay. Bonus Section 3. The Itchy and Scratchy Question. What Springfield's children are being taught. Itchy and Scratchy is the cartoon within a cartoon that Bart and Lisa watch on the Krusty the Clown show. It is an extended parody of violent cartoons, primarily Tom and Jerry, in which a mouse named Itchy perpetually murders a cat named Scratchy in increasingly elaborate and grotesque ways. The violence is extreme by cartoon standards. The murders are inventive. The cat's suffering is presented as entertainment, and Springfield's children love it. They are depicted consistently as deeply invested in Itchy and Scratchy, as excitable about new episodes, as collectors of Itchy and Scratchy merchandise, as children for whom this cartoon, which is essentially nothing but graphic violence presented as comedy, is a primary source of entertainment and cultural reference. The show has addressed the Itchy and Scratchy question directly, in the episode Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, in which Marge campaigns against cartoon violence and succeeds in getting the show reformed into something gentler, which the children immediately stop watching in favor of going outside and playing. The episode's conclusion is generally read as a defense of cartoon violence, a suggestion that the moral panic around violent entertainment is misplaced, that children understand the difference between fictional violence and real violence and are not harmed by the former. This reading is probably correct as a description of the episode's intent. But there is another reading available if you look at the Itchy and Scratchy question through the lens of what we know about Springfield's children specifically. These are children growing up in a contaminated environment, children whose neurological development may have been affected by long-term exposure to the same radiation that has affected their parents. Children who are being educated in an underfunded school system, staffed by teachers whose own cognitive function has been compromised. Children who have been growing up, for decades, in a town that the federal government classified as an environmental hazard and sealed under a dome because it was too dangerous to allow its contamination to spread. What does it mean to show children in these specific circumstances a steady diet of graphic violence presented as entertainment? Not in the sense that the Marge campaigns against violence episode was addressing, not the media effects question that episode was satirizing, but in the more specific sense of what are these children in these specific circumstances absorbing from this material? The violence in Itchy and Scratchy is always visited by the small upon the large. The mouse destroys the cat. The powerless party eliminates the powerful party through ingenuity, through creativity, through a willingness to use whatever tools are available. It is, when you read it in this context, a fantasy of the powerless exercising power, of the small person finding a way to neutralize the large person's advantages. For children who are growing up in the shadow of Burns's power plant, who are drinking contaminated water and breathing compromised air, and attending an underfunded school and watching their parents work in a facility that they are too young to understand, is poisoning them. For these children, specifically, the fantasy that Itchy and Scratchy represents might not be pure entertainment. It might be something more like emotional sustenance, the representation of a world in which the small party wins. And then the episode ends and the world returns to the one where Burns is still alive, and the plant is still running, and the water still comes out of the tap in Springfield tasting the way it tastes. Bart identified with Itchy. This is established in multiple episodes. Bart sees himself in the mouse, in the character who uses chaos and creativity to defeat the powerful, who refuses to accept the hierarchies that the world has constructed, who finds satisfaction in the specific joy of disruption. This is not surprising given what we know about Bart. It is actually a fairly sophisticated choice of identification for a 10-year-old in his specific circumstances. Lisa, predictably, is more conflicted about Itchy and Scratchy. She enjoys it in spite of herself. She knows she should not enjoy it. She knows that the violence is the point rather than the story or the character or any of the things she values in her other cultural consumption. But she watches anyway, with a slightly guilty enthusiasm, because there is something in the fantasy of the small party winning that even Lisa, who believes in systemic change through argument and evidence, cannot entirely resist. The fantasy is the same for both of them. The specific version differs, but the underlying appeal, the idea that the world contains mechanisms for the small to overcome the large, is what keeps them watching. What keeps every Springfield child watching? Krusty produces it. Burns allows it to air on Krusty's channel. The children absorb it. And the fantasy it provides makes the reality of their circumstances marginally more bearable, which means it functions, in a low-grade way, as the same kind of management tool that every other entertainment and distraction mechanism in Springfield functions as. Keep the population occupied. Keep them entertained. Keep the fantasy of the small party winning available at all times, so that the large party's actual dominance does not become intolerable. Itchy and Scratchy is not just a cartoon within a cartoon. It is potentially the most honest statement the show makes about the relationship between entertainment and power. About what entertainment does in environments where power is absolute. About why the people who benefit from that absolute power have no interest in limiting the entertainment that helps the people they benefit from accept their powerlessness. Burns owns the town. Burns's influence extends to the media the town consumes, and the media the town's children consume. The most popular content on the most popular children's program in Springfield is a fantasy about the little guy winning, which keeps the little guys from doing anything about the fact that they are losing. Number bonus? Section 4. The wedding episodes: What marriage means in Springfield. The Simpsons has revisited Homer and Marge's wedding multiple times. It has shown their courtship multiple times, in different versions depending on when the episode aired and what decade the floating timeline had relocated their youth to. It has examined the foundations of their marriage from multiple angles, in multiple seasons, with multiple different writing staffs bringing their own perspectives to the fundamental question of what keeps these two people together. The answer the show returns to most consistently is not the romantic answer. It is not that Homer and Marge are perfectly matched, that their specific qualities complement each other in ways that produce a harmonious partnership. They are not perfectly matched. They are visibly, regularly, demonstrably mismatched in ways that the show depicts with genuine honesty. Homer is impulsive, self-centered, cognitively limited, emotionally immature, physically inconsiderate, professionally negligible, and periodically dangerous in domestic contexts. He tries. The show is careful to establish that Homer tries. He loves his family. The love is real, and the show treats it as real even in episodes where the behavior is terrible. But trying and loving are not sufficient to prevent the harm. His limitations regularly visit on the people around him. Marge is patient, organized, emotionally competent, socially aware, physically healthy, professionally capable in the various contexts the show has placed her in, and fundamentally oriented toward the well-being of others in ways that are both admirable and, at their extreme, self-effacing. She absorbs Homer's chaos and converts it into something manageable. She provides the structural intelligence that keeps the household functioning despite Homer's consistent efforts to destabilize it. These two people should not work. The specific combination of Homer's deficits and Marge's capacities should produce exactly the kind of relationship it does produce on the surface. An arrangement in which one person carries most of the weight and the other person periodically notices this and feels bad about it, and then goes back to not carrying the weight. But they do work. Not perfectly, not without cost, but in a way that sustains across 36 years, which is longer than most fictional marriages and longer than a great many real ones. The show's explanation, when it gives one, is love. Homer and Marge love each other. The love is genuine. And within The Simpsons' moral framework, genuine love is enough. It is sufficient to overcome mismatches, to repair damage, to survive the specific combination of disasters that Homer regularly generates. But look at what the love actually does in the episodes that examine it most closely. It does not change Homer. This is crucial. The love does not produce a better Homer. Homer does not become more competent or more considerate or more cognitively functional because Marge loves him. The love exists alongside all of Homer's limitations and does not substantially diminish them. Homer in season 36 is as impulsive and as self-centered and as periodically catastrophic as Homer in season 1. What the love does is keep Marge there. It keeps her from leaving. It provides the emotional foundation that makes Marge's extraordinary patience sustainable, because patience built on nothing eventually collapses, but patience built on genuine love can maintain itself longer than reason would predict. The episodes in which Marge nearly leaves, and there are several across the decades, are the episodes that show most clearly what the marriage is costing her. She has deferred things. She has set aside possibilities. She has organized her life around the maintenance of a family structure that requires her constant management and offers her limited personal reward. The show is aware of this cost. It is not starry-eyed about what Marge is giving up. Some of the show's most honest writing has been about the specific gap between the life Marge might have had and the life she actually has. The episodes about her painting, the episodes about her professional ambitions, the episodes in which she encounters a version of herself that could have existed in different circumstances and has to choose between that version and the version that is Homer's wife. She always chooses Homer. And the show frames this as a genuine choice, not a capitulation. But it is hard to watch all of those episodes in sequence without wondering whether the choice is entirely free, whether the specific combination of love and obligation, and the particular damage that comes from growing up in Springfield without resources for anything else, has left Marge with choices that feel free but are actually more constrained than they appear. The coma theory, if you apply it here, makes Marge's situation even more specific. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to its family, then the Marge we see is Homer's idealized version of his wife. She is always there, she is always patient. She always chooses him. She does not leave, because in Homer's dream, the possibility of Marge leaving is the most terrifying thing his unconscious mind can conceive. And so it keeps that possibility at a perpetual distance, always present enough to be feared, but never quite close enough to materialize. That is not a marriage, that is a prayer. It is a man in a coma dreaming that the woman he loves has decided to stay, and being unable to stop dreaming it because if the dream stops, the answer to whether she actually stayed is out there waiting in the waking world, and Homer cannot face it. Whether or not you accept the coma theory, there is something in that reading that captures something true about the show's marriage. Something about the desperate, unconditional quality of Homer's love for Marge that has always felt less like comfortable partnership and more like a man holding on to something he knows is fragile. Holding on tight because he understands, at whatever level he is capable of understanding things, that the thing he is holding is the most important thing he has, and that losing it would be a kind of catastrophe that no amount of cartoon resilience could recover from. The show has kept them together for 36 years. It will keep them together for however many more years the show runs. The marriage is one of the fixed points of the Springfield universe. It does not end, because if it ended, the show would have to be about something else entirely. The family on the couch. The specific configuration. That is what the show is. Dissolve the marriage and you dissolve the show. But knowing that the marriage is protected by the show's structural requirements does not diminish the specific, detailed, emotionally complex portrait of what that marriage actually is that the show has been building across 36 years. The complexity is real. The cost is real. The love is real. And the way those three things coexist, without resolution, without the marriage becoming either the pure romance of idealization or the obvious disaster that Homer's limitations might seem to predict, is one of the genuinely remarkable things the show has achieved. Homer and Marge Simpson have the most examined marriage in the history of American television, and after 36 years of examination, the show still has not fully figured out what it is. Neither have we. Number bonus. Section 5. The Springfield that never was deleted. Storylines and dropped threads. Every long-running television show has its dropped threads. The storylines that were started and not finished. The character arcs that were gestured at and then abandoned. The continuity that was established in one episode and contradicted or simply ignored in the next. The Simpsons has more of these than almost any other show, not because it was careless, though carelessness is certainly part of the explanation, but because it has been running for so long that the accumulation of dropped threads has become a significant feature of the show's texture. Some of these dropped threads are trivial. Continuity errors, character details that changed between seasons because no one checked the Bible, or because the Bible was not comprehensive enough to cover the detail in question, or because the show simply moved on, and the inconsistency was never addressed. But some of the dropped threads are not trivial. Some of them were significant storylines that the show introduced with apparent intention and then simply stopped developing, leaving the material hanging in the middle of the narrative like a sentence that trails off before it reaches its verb. The most significant of these is probably Homer's relationship to the consequences of his own history at the nuclear plant. The show established, across multiple episodes, that Homer has been responsible for an extraordinary number of incidents at the power plant. 742 documented errors, according to one episode's accounting. This number is astonishing. It is the kind of number that, in a world with functioning regulatory bodies and legal accountability, would have resulted in criminal charges, civil suits, and the permanent decommissioning of a facility that had allowed this level of incompetence in a safety-critical position. The show established the number. The show referenced it. The show even made clear, in the German Investors episode, that the plant's actual cost to bring to compliance was nearly bankrupt-inducing. And then the show continued as before, with Homer at the plant, pressing the button, eating the donuts, accumulating new errors to add to the 742. The thread was never picked up. The implication that Homer's presence at the plant is a slow-motion environmental catastrophe was introduced and then treated as background detail, as color, as one more layer of Springfield's ambient wrongness that the show acknowledged and then declined to follow to its consequences. There is also the thread of Abe Simpson's relationship with Burns. The show established that Abe and Burns struck a deal that guaranteed Homer's employment in exchange for Abe's silence about something Burns had done. The deal was established. The crime it was covering up was never fully specified. The implications of the deal, including what it means for how we understand both Abe's relationship with Homer and Burns's relationship with the Simpson family, were never fully explored. Abe knows things about Burns that most people in Springfield do not know. Abe has been, his entire adult life, complicit in Burns's ability to operate without accountability in exchange for Homer's job security. Abe, who is depicted as a largely sympathetic if frequently confused and tangential figure, is also, when the deal is taken seriously, an accessory to whatever Burns has been doing with his 700-year lifespan and his medical experiments and his germ warfare laboratory. The complicity is real. The show established it. And then the show continued to use Abe primarily as a source of confused old man stories about his past. The dropped thread of Mona Simpson's activism deserves attention too. Mona destroyed a biological weapons laboratory. She was part of a radical activist network that operated against corporate malfeasance in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The network she was part of did not disappear when she went underground. Her fellow activists continued their lives, presumably continued their work in some form. The FBI that was hunting her was hunting a movement, not just an individual. The questions that Mona's backstory raises about what Burns was actually doing in that germ warfare lab, about who else knew, about what the network she was part of discovered before she was forced to run, were all introduced and then left unaddressed. The biological weapons angle is particularly striking. Burns owned a germ warfare facility in Springfield. It was operational. It had agents stored in it. Mona's group destroyed those agents, but they did not destroy the facility's capability, presumably, and they did not expose Burns to any meaningful accountability. The FBI hunted Mona. Nobody investigated Burns. Nobody asked what a nuclear power plant operator was doing, maintaining a biological weapons laboratory in a residential area. This is one of the most dramatically significant pieces of information the show has ever established about Burns, and it was dropped almost immediately after it was introduced. The germ warfare lab appears in one flashback episode and is never referenced again. Burns continues as the show's primary billionaire villain without the weight of biological weapons development being added to his accounting. There is a version of The Simpsons in which the germ warfare thread was followed, in which Mona's sacrifice became the starting point for an investigation into Burns that eventually exposed what he had been doing for the preceding century, in which the Simpsons family's particular position, Homer as the inside man at the power plant, Lisa as the moral intelligence, Bart as the agent of chaos, Marge as the organizing principle, was used to dismantle the system that had damaged all of them. That version of the show exists nowhere, except in the implications of episodes that were made and then abandoned. It is the Springfield that never was. The show that was being gestured at, and that the format and the pressures and the requirements of episodic television for a primetime audience ultimately prevented from existing. But the gestures are still there. The dropped threads are still visible if you know where to look. And the Springfield that never was is, in some ways, more interesting than the Springfield that has existed for 36 years. Not because the actual show is not interesting, but because the show that could have existed is the show that had the courage of its own implications. That followed the evidence to its conclusions. That let the family confront what Springfield actually is and fight back against it with everything they had. That show would have had to end. Stories with that kind of structure require resolution. The floating timeline cannot sustain them. The loop cannot accommodate the conclusion they require. So instead we have what we have, which is, in its own way, extraordinary. Not the show that had the courage of its implications, but a show that planted those implications everywhere, in every episode, in every dropped thread and unfinished arc, and kept them there, preserved in amber, for 36 years of people looking closely enough to find them. The Springfield that never was is still there, underneath the Springfield that exists. In the same way that the Bart who could have become someone is underneath the Bart who stays 10. In the same way that the Homer who removed the crayon and saw clearly is underneath the Homer who chose the fog. In the same way that the town that could have faced itself honestly is underneath the town that voted to criminalize honesty. The possibility lives alongside the reality, permanently, in the same frame. And that coexistence, the perpetual proximity of what could have been to what is, might be the most specifically American thing the show has ever managed to depict. Not the specific content of the possibility, not what Springfield could have become, but the fact that the possibility is always there, always visible if you look, always within reach if someone decided to reach for it, and the fact that no one does. Week after week, season after season, episode after episode, the possibility remains, untouched, waiting. Springfield keeps the lights on and everyone goes home. It has been 4 hours in Springfield. We have been through the Halloween specials and Sideshow, Bob and Bart's Missing Future, and the Flanders Family Darkness, and Moe's Buried Identity, and the School Conspiracy, and Krusty's Shadow Life, and the secondary characters who should not exist, and Lisa's psychological weight, and the time paradox that holds it all together. We have been through Barney and Lenny and Carl and the itchy and scratchy question and the wedding and the dropped threads and the Springfield that never was. And the show is still running, new episodes still airing, the family still on the couch, Bart still 10 and Lisa still 8, and Maggie still watching with those extraordinary silent eyes, and Homer still pressing the button in Sector 7G, and the plant still running, and Burns still alive, and the water still flowing, through Springfield's pipes tasting the way it tastes. Some things will not be resolved before the show ends. Most of them, probably. The mysteries we talked about tonight are not the kind that get resolved in a series finale. They are the kind that persist, that outlast the show, that live in the reruns and the streaming libraries and the memory of everyone who watched closely enough to wonder. Wonder is fine. Wonder is appropriate. Springfield was built for wondering. It has more depth than any individual explorer can fully map, more layers than any single theory can encompass, more rooms than any one person can visit in a single night. We have visited some of them tonight. There are others. There will always be others. Number, the Treehouse of Horror, canon going deeper. We established earlier that the Treehouse of Horror episodes function as a kind of shadow truth for the show, a place where the material that cannot be said directly gets dressed in genre costume and presented to the audience as entertainment. But there is more to explore here. Because the Treehouse of Horror episodes are not just thematically significant, they are historically significant in terms of what they tell us about how the show evolved and what the people making it believed they were doing. The first Treehouse of Horror, which aired in October of 1990, was a genuine creative risk. Animated shows did not do this kind of thing in 1990. The landscape of primetime animation was not hospitable to horror content, even comic horror, even horror that was clearly framed as something other than the show's normal register. The decision to make the first special a priority, to give it the promotional weight and the production resources that a holiday special receives, was a statement of intent. The show was declaring that it had range, that it could go places that other animated shows were not willing to go. The specific content of the first special is worth examining in detail because it established patterns that would repeat across the next 34 Halloween episodes. The special is divided into 3 segments: The Bad Seed, based on Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and 2 original horror concepts. The framing device, as mentioned earlier, is the children telling scary stories to each other in the treehouse. But even within the frame, even with the explicit acknowledgement that these are stories rather than events, the show was doing something specific. It was using the horror genre to access emotional territory that the comedy register could not reach. The Poe segment in particular is not comedy at all. It is a straight reading of the poem, voiced by James Earl Jones and illustrated with genuinely beautiful animation. It is respectful and sincere, and it exists in a special that also contains Homer being eaten by aliens. The tonal range of that first special, from sincerely moving to broadly comic, established that the Treehouse of Horror was not just a horror parody machine. It was a space where the show could be whatever it needed to be, where genre was a tool rather than a restriction. This freedom produced some of the show's finest single episodes across the next several years. The Shinning has already been discussed. But consider also the segment called Homer 3 from Treehouse of Horror 6, in which Homer is pulled into a three-dimensional computer-generated space and eventually emerges, at the segment's end, into what appears to be a real-world street in Hollywood. The segment is formally experimental in ways that almost no primetime animation was at the time. It used actual three-dimensional computer-generated imagery, which was expensive and technically complex, to depict a genuinely philosophical crisis, Homer being trapped in a dimension where the usual rules of his existence no longer apply, and it resolved that crisis by having Homer step out of fiction into something that presented itself as reality. The meta implications of that ending, the animated character stepping into live-action footage, are significant even if they were primarily intended as a sight gag. Homer leaving the animated frame. Homer entering a space that looks like the real world. Homer, the eternal fictional construct, touching something that exists outside the fiction. The Treehouse of Horror episodes keep doing this. They keep finding ways to push at the boundary between what The Simpsons is and what it is presenting itself as. They are the episodes in which the show is most aware of itself as a constructed artifact, as something made, as something that could have been made differently. And that self-awareness, that formal restlessness, is part of what makes the Halloween specials feel different from the regular episodes in a way that goes beyond their content. They feel like the show being awake to its own nature, like someone turned on a light in a room that is usually navigated in comfortable darkness. Now consider what happens to the Treehouse of Horror specials in the later seasons, specifically after season 12 or so, which is the period that most fans mark as the beginning of the show's quality decline. The formal experimentation does not entirely disappear. The show continues to find interesting things to do within the Halloween frame. But the emotional register changes. The early specials had weight. They had moments of genuine beauty and genuine horror, sometimes in the same segment. The later specials tend toward parody more exclusively. They reference existing horror properties rather than generating their own horror logic. They are funnier, often, in a surface way, but they are lighter, less interested in using the horror frame to access the emotional content that the frame can reach. This mirrors the change in the regular seasons. The early seasons used comedy to access genuine emotion. The comedy was not a barrier to the emotion, it was a vehicle for it. The later seasons use comedy more as an end in itself, which produces episodes that are entertaining but that do not carry the weight of the early material. The Treehouse of Horror specials follow the same trajectory because they are made by the same people under the same conditions. But here is what is worth noting about even the later, lighter Treehouse of Horror specials. Even when the special is primarily a parody vehicle, even when the formal experimentation has given way to comfortable genre recreation, the specials still occupy a different position in the show's ecosystem than the regular episodes. They are still non-canonical. They are still declared exempt from the continuity rules that govern the rest of the show. And that exemption continues to do something. Even a light, parody-heavy later season Treehouse of Horror special is still a place where the characters can die, where the world can end, where consequences can be real in a way they cannot be real in the regular episodes. And even if the deaths are lighter now, even if the world endings are less invested in their own implications, the formal fact of their possibility is maintained. The show is still maintaining the space, still keeping the door open, still declaring, every October, that there is a version of this world where things do not reset, where the characters do not come back, where what happens has weight, and that weight persists. Even if the show is not currently using that space as fully as it once did, the space exists, and as long as it exists, the possibility that it might be used that way again exists alongside it. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's oldest and most consistently maintained creative commitment, 36 specials in 36 years. Whatever else changed about the show, whatever quality fluctuations occurred, whatever writing staffs came and went, and whatever showrunners shaped their particular eras, the Halloween special kept coming. The non-canonical space kept being maintained. There is something quietly moving about that consistency if you are in the right frame of mind to receive it. 36 years of the show saying, every October, we remember what this can be. We remember the emotional range this frame can access. We have not used it perfectly every year, but we have maintained it. We have kept the door open. We have kept the lights on in the haunted house. Not because we are always going inside, but because leaving the lights off felt like giving something up that we were not prepared to give up. Number. Sideshow Bob, the music he carries and what it tells you. There is a specific detail about Sideshow Bob that deserves its own extended examination, because it is the detail that most clearly illuminates the gap between who Bob is and what the show decided to do with him. Bob sings, not incidentally, not as a background character trait. Bob sings with genuine skill, genuine passion, and a genuine knowledge of the operatic and musical theater repertoire that suggests this is not performance. It is something he loves. It is possibly the only thing in Bob's life that he engages with without irony, without strategic calculation, without the elaborate self-consciousness that governs everything else he does. The most famous example is in the episode Cape Fear, in which Bob, having been released from prison, stalks the Simpson family on a houseboat. In the final confrontation, Bart stalls for time by asking Bob to perform the complete score of the HMS Pinafore. And Bob does it. He performs the entire score. He loses himself in the performance. He forgets temporarily that he is supposed to be a villain in the middle of a murder attempt. He is a performer in the middle of a performance, and the performance consumes him more completely than the murder plot ever did. The show plays this for comedy. The joke is that Bob is ridiculous, that his commitment to Gilbert and Sullivan exceeds his commitment to the evil he is supposed to be doing, and it is funny. It is one of the episode's best moments. But look at what the moment is actually showing you. Bob is never more himself than when he is singing, never more present, never more fully engaged with something that is not about strategy or resentment or the accumulated grievances of a man who feels he was denied what he deserved. In the music, all of that falls away. He is just a man with an extraordinary voice, performing something he loves, for a 10-year-old boy who asked him to. This is the Bob that the show caught a glimpse of and never quite followed. A man who chose villainy because every other identity available to him felt wrong, who discovered that villainy was also wrong, not morally necessarily, but functionally, because his genuine self is not a villain but a performer, and the performance of villainy was always slightly inadequate as a vehicle for the thing that actually animates him, which is the music. The Gilbert and Sullivan obsession is not incidental. HMS, Pinafore, The Mikado, The Pirates of Penzance, the specific works that Bob references across his appearances, these are works about people who are not who they appear to be. Works about disguised identities, about class performance, about the gap between social role and authentic self. They are operettas about exactly the thing Bob is living. He did not choose Gilbert and Sullivan randomly. Or, rather, the writers of the show did not choose them randomly. The specific material of Bob's musical passion is the material that mirrors his specific existential situation. A man who has been performing a role that does not fit him, whose authentic self keeps breaking through in the form of music, who cannot help singing even when he should be committing murder, is living out the themes of the very art form he loves. The music is Bob's soul. It is the one thing he has not been able to corrupt, or weaponize, or turn into an instrument of the revenge fantasies that have consumed the rest of his life. Every time he sings, he is briefly, genuinely himself. And then the song ends, and the villain costume goes back on, and the plan resumes, and the potential of what Bob could be retreats back underneath the performance of what he has decided to be. In another universe, Sideshow Bob is not a villain. He is a performer, a serious one. A man whose voice and whose commitment to craft would have found an audience, would have found a stage, would have found the specific kind of recognition that he has been seeking through his elaborate criminal schemes. But in Springfield, the stage he found was the humiliating one. And the response to that humiliation was the criminal career that defined him. And somewhere inside the criminal career, always, the music, uncontaminated, irreducible, the thing that cannot be taken from him because it exists in a register that his grudges cannot reach. The show gave Bob that. It gave him the music, and it gave him the Gilbert and Sullivan, and it gave him the moment in Cape Fear where he sang the entire HMS Pinafore on a houseboat because a boy asked him to. And then it kept using him as a murderous villain. Both things are true. The show has always been very good at holding two true things in the same frame without resolving the tension between them. The villain and the artist, the murderer and the performer. The man who has wasted his life and the man who, in the music, is briefly exactly what he should be. The music does not excuse the crimes. It does not make the harm he has done and tried to do acceptable, but it complicates the accounting. It adds something to the ledger that is not easily subtracted. A genuine gift, genuinely deployed, genuinely moving, existing alongside everything else he is. That is Sideshow Bob. Everything he was supposed to be and everything he chose instead, existing in the same body, reaching an uneasy coexistence that the show managed, at its best, to make feel like something other than simple contradiction. Like the kind of complexity that actual people contain, when you look at them long enough and carefully enough to see past the surface role to the person, the surface role is imperfectly containing. Number Bart's intelligence and what Springfield did with it. We talked about Bart's future and about the arc the show was building through its early seasons. But there is a more specific element of Bart's psychology that deserves its own extended treatment because it is the piece of the Bart puzzle that makes everything else about him make sense, and it is the piece the show has consistently treated as the least interesting thing about him. Bart is smart, not in the way Lisa is smart. Not book smart, not academically organized, not the kind of intelligence that performs well in institutional contexts with standardized metrics and clear evaluation criteria. Bart's intelligence is a different variety, and it is the variety that institutional contexts are least equipped to recognize and most likely to suppress. Bart's intelligence is social. It is strategic. It is his ability to read a room, to understand what the people in the room want and fear, to identify the leverage points in a social situation, and to use them with extraordinary precision. He is, in the domain of human psychology and social dynamics, as gifted as Lisa is in the domain of academic knowledge and formal reasoning. The show demonstrates this consistently without ever making it explicit. Every successful prank requires a detailed understanding of the target's psychology. Every escape from trouble requires an accurate read of who has power in the situation and what that person's priorities are. Every alliance Bart forms and every alliance he breaks requires a sophisticated social map that Bart maintains intuitively and updates in real time. This is genuine intelligence. It is the kind of intelligence that, in a different context, in a role that valued those specific skills, would be recognized as exceptional, a natural negotiator, a natural salesperson, in the positive sense, a natural leader, in contexts where the leadership required was not the institutional kind. But Springfield Elementary does not teach social intelligence. It does not measure it. It does not recognize it as a form of intelligence at all. The metric the school uses is the one that Bart consistently fails on, which is academic performance on standardized material in a structured classroom setting. And because that is the only metric available, and because Bart consistently fails on it, Bart is classified as a failure and treated accordingly. What this means in practice is that Bart spends his school years in an environment that is systematically unable to see the thing he is actually good at. The place that is supposed to develop his capabilities is the place that is most thoroughly blind to his capabilities. And the people who could potentially identify what he actually has, his teachers, his principal, the school counselor who occasionally appears with a clipboard, are all measuring him against a standard that his genuine intelligence does not fit. The result is a boy who knows he is smart, on some level, because the evidence of his own effectiveness in the domains he actually operates in is undeniable, but who also knows from the institutional record that he is not smart, because every official measure confirms his failure. He carries both pieces of knowledge simultaneously, and the tension between them, between the felt sense of his own capability and the institutional record of his inadequacy, is one of the primary drivers of his behavior. The pranks are partly about this tension. When Bart successfully pranks a teacher, when he engineers a situation that produces exactly the chaos he intended it to produce, he is demonstrating the very intelligence the teacher has just graded him as lacking. He is using the social and strategic skills that the classroom cannot access and proving, in the only domain available to him, that he is not what the grades say he is. This is also why the pranks need witnesses. Bart does not prank in private. He pranks publicly, in contexts where his authorship of the prank is known or knowable. The audience is essential. The prank without the recognition of authorship is worthless to him, because the recognition is the point. Someone needs to know that he did this. Someone needs to see that it worked. The intelligence needs to be witnessed even if the specific form it is taking is not something any institutional metric can capture. There is something genuinely moving about that, when you sit with it. A boy trying to make visible the intelligence that the systems around him cannot see, using the only tools available to him, which are the tools of disruption and chaos, because those are the tools that the environment has left accessible, because everything else that might demonstrate what he is has been locked behind institutional gates that require academic performance to open. Bart cannot get into the gifted program because he does not test well. He cannot get special recognition from his teachers because his classroom performance does not merit it. He cannot get his parents to see what he is capable of because his parents are responsive to the same institutional metrics that define him as a failure, and Homer in particular lacks the cognitive framework to recognize and appreciate the specific kind of intelligence Bart has. So he pranks. He orchestrates chaos that requires extraordinary social intelligence to execute successfully. He demonstrates, over and over, in ways that the people around him enjoy and laugh at without understanding, exactly how smart he actually is. And nobody connects the dots. This is the saddest element of Bart's situation. Not that his intelligence goes unrecognized by the institution, which is the obvious failure, but that his intelligence goes unrecognized by the people who love him. Homer and Marge, who love Bart genuinely, who want good things for him, who worry about his future and his education and his capacity to build a life for himself after the floating timeline eventually becomes irrelevant, do not see what they are looking at when they watch Bart work. They see trouble. They see a boy who is disappointing the institution. They do not see a boy who is outmaneuvering the institution with tools the institution does not understand. They do not see the intelligence in the disruption. They see the disruption. And Bart, who can read a room with extraordinary precision, knows this. He knows what his parents see when they look at him. He knows that the gap between what he is and what they see is too large to bridge with an argument or an explanation. You cannot explain social intelligence to people who are not looking for it. You can only demonstrate it, and the demonstrations are always wrapped in a context, the prank, the scheme, the escape from trouble, that obscures rather than clarifies what is actually being demonstrated. So Bart stays in the gap, between the intelligence that is real and the recognition that never comes, between the person he is and the person the record says he is, between the future that his capabilities could build and the future that the institutional accounting predicts. At 10 years old, forever, riding the skateboard through the gap and grinning because the alternative is something his intelligence is sophisticated enough to recognize and his personality is not constituted to accept. Number. The Flanders neighborhood, what it means to live next door to your opposite. Let us spend some additional time on the specific geographic and relational fact that Homer Simpson and Ned Flanders have lived next door to each other for 36 years, because the proximity is the whole thing. The entire commentary that the show is making about these two men exists in the fact that they are neighbors, that the boundary between their lives is a property line, that they share a fence. What does it mean to live next door to your opposite? In Ned's case, it means living next door to a man who embodies everything the conditioning removed from Ned. Homer is impulsive where Ned is controlled. Homer expresses anger freely where Ned cannot express it at all. Homer fails publicly and recovers and fails again without apparent shame, where Ned is constitutionally incapable of public failure without experiencing it as catastrophe. Homer's relationship with religion is casual at best, non-existent in practice, while Ned's is the organizing principle of his entire existence. But here is the thing about Ned's relationship with Homer that the show has been circling without fully articulating. Ned is drawn to Homer, not just obligated to him by neighborly convention, not just tolerating him because the property line prevents retreat, actually drawn to him, present in Homer's life with a consistency and a warmth that exceeds anything the formal requirements of neighborhood would demand. Ned helps Homer, constantly. He lends tools that Homer will destroy. He provides food during the Simpsons' periodic domestic crises. He babysits the children. He is available, again and again, in ways that a man who was merely tolerating his difficult neighbor would not be. There are different explanations for this. The most obvious is that Ned's conditioning compels him to be helpful, that he cannot not help because the capacity for refusal was removed from his behavioral toolkit, along with the capacity for expressed anger. He helps Homer because he has no mechanism for not helping him. The helpfulness is not chosen, it is automatic. But this explanation, while supported by what we know about the conditioning, does not fully account for the quality of Ned's engagement with Homer. He does not help Homer the way you help someone you are obligated to help. He helps Homer with the specific energy of someone who finds the person they are helping genuinely compelling. Homer is compelling to Ned in a specific way. He is the unconditioned version of the self that Ned was never allowed to have. Homer feels things and expresses them without the elaborate filtering system that Ned's entire personality is built around. Homer is angry when he is angry. He is joyful when he is joyful. He is afraid when he is afraid. There is no gap between Homer's interior emotional experience and his exterior emotional expression, because Homer lacks the cognitive and behavioral architecture to maintain such a gap. This is, from Ned's perspective, something to experience, not to emulate. Ned cannot emulate it, but to be near, to observe, to feel the presence of a man living inside his own emotions rather than performing a careful management of them. Homer, in this reading, is what Ned was before the 8 years of conditioning, or at least a version of it. A man who has not had the rougher edges managed away, who is what he is in full, regardless of the social cost. The property line between them is the boundary between the conditioned self and the unconditioned self, between the version of the person that the institutional modification produced and the version that would have existed without it. And Ned stands at that boundary every day, choosing to maintain it, choosing to stay on his side, because he does not know what is on the other side for him. He only knows that Homer is on the other side, which tells him that the other side is a place where you can fall down and get up, and fall down again, and none of it accumulates into a judgment you carry forever. Homer never judges Ned. This is crucial. Homer is oblivious to Ned in a way that functions, paradoxically, as acceptance. He is not performing acceptance. He is not generously overlooking Ned's flaws. He simply does not register Ned with the judgmental apparatus that Ned has spent his life avoiding. Homer sees Ned as the neighbor with the nice lawn and the friendly demeanor and the inexhaustible supply of tools. He does not see Ned's darkness or Ned's conditioning or Ned's sealed room or Ned's bottomless grief. He sees the surface, and the surface is fine. And that non-seeing, that innocent obliviousness, is the thing that makes Homer the closest thing Ned has to unconditional acceptance. Not because Homer is accepting something, but because Homer is not rejecting anything. He does not have enough information to reject anything, and he is not interested in acquiring it. From Ned's side of the fence, this looks like grace. Homer's ignorance reads as mercy. The man who sees nothing to judge offers something that the man who carries the weight of everything he is forbidden to express experiences as relief. This is why Ned will not leave. Why he stays next door to a man who destroys his property and ignores his advice and treats his friendship as infrastructure rather than relationship. Because the alternative to Homer's oblivious acceptance is the awareness and the judgment of a world that knows what Ned actually is and what it costs to make him this way. Better to be not seen by someone who means well than to be seen by someone who understands what they are seeing. The fence between their yards is the most emotionally complex object in Springfield. It represents the distance between two men who are closer to each other than either of them knows, separated by exactly the property line that the neighborhood requires and that the show has maintained for 36 years. Number Moe's Bar as institution. What taverns mean in Springfield. Moe's Tavern is more than Moe's place of business. In the ecology of Springfield, it functions as a specific kind of social institution. The kind that exists in communities where the formal institutions, the church, the school, the civic organizations, have failed to provide sufficient space for a particular kind of human need. The need that Moe's Tavern addresses is the need for a place where the performance of daily life can be briefly suspended, where Homer does not have to be the safety inspector who is failing to provide safety, where Barney does not have to be the man who could have been something else and chose not to, where Lenny and Carl do not have to be the responsible workers who show up every day to a job that is slowly poisoning the town they live in, where, for the duration of a beer, everyone in the bar can simply be a person in a bar, nothing more defined than that. This is a specific and genuine social function, and in Springfield, given everything we know about the town, it is a more necessary function than it would be in a community without the specific stressors that Springfield's population deals with. In a town where the water is contaminated and the school is failing, and the employer is a man who has been secretly managing the population's cognitive function for decades, the place where you can go and simply be is not a luxury. It is a survival mechanism. Moe understands this, not abstractly, not philosophically, but practically. He understands it the way a person understands the thing they are providing without necessarily being able to articulate what they are providing. He keeps the bar open because the bar needs to be open, because the people who come through the door every night need it to be open, because the alternative to the bar is those people dealing with the reality of Springfield without a decompression space, And Mo has seen enough of what that produces to understand that the bar is doing necessary work even when it does not look like it. The relationship between Homer and Mo is, in many ways, the clearest illustration of what the bar provides. Homer treats Mo as a service. He comes in, he drinks, he complains, he leaves. He is not invested in Mo's well-being in any sustained way. He does not inquire about Mo's life except when the inquiry is incidental to something else. He uses Mo the way you use a therapist, except that therapists are professional helpers, and Mo is simply a man behind a bar who has nowhere else to be. And Mo lets this happen. He absorbs Homer's self-centeredness, and he keeps serving the beer, and he keeps listening to the complaints, and he offers the occasional piece of advice that Homer never follows. He does this not because he is noble, not because he is performing some altruistic function that he has consciously chosen, but because the specific texture of his relationship with Homer is also the texture of the work his bar does for the entire community. Everyone who comes in treats Mo the way Homer treats Mo, and Mo receives all of them the same way he receives Homer, with exasperated warmth. With the specific combination of frustration and genuine care, that is what you feel when you love people who exhaust you, but who also need you in ways that you have decided you are willing to meet. The bar is Mo's vocation, not the business, the function. He was built, whether by accident or design or by the same logic of environmental compression that has shaped everything else in Springfield, to be the person who provides this specific thing to this specific community. And the contradictions of his character, the hostility and the warmth, the obscured past and the transparent present-day misery, the failed romances and the genuine sweetness that occasionally breaks through all of it, these contradictions are what make him adequate to the function. A purely warm person would not be able to sustain the role. A purely hostile person would drive the customers away. Mo's specific mixture is precisely calibrated, even if the calibration was accidental, to the needs of the people he serves. The bar has been destroyed and rebuilt. The regulars have come and gone and come back. Mo has had his heart broken and his business nearly ruined, and his prank call equanimity tested to its limits. And the bar remains. Because Springfield needs it. And Springfield needing it is the closest Mo will ever come to being needed. And being needed is the closest Mo Sislak has ever come to home. Number. Springfield Elementary's hidden history. Principal Skinner, as established, is not actually Principal Skinner. He is Armin Tamzarian, a man who adopted the identity of a man presumed dead in Vietnam and built a life and a career around that borrowed name. We know this. The show told us this and then told us the town voted to pretend it was not true. But here is a question the show raised and then moved past without fully examining. What does it mean that this man, with this specific history, with this specific relationship to his own identity, was in charge of Springfield's children for 20 years? Not the question of what it means symbolically or thematically, though that is interesting. The practical question. What does it mean that the person responsible for the educational development of Springfield's children was a person who did not exist officially, whose credentials belonged to someone else, whose entire institutional authority rested on a fiction that the town eventually voted to maintain? Skinner's degrees, if he has any, belong to the real Seymour Skinner. His professional credentials, his references, his employment history, the institutional record that justified his appointment as principal, all of it belongs to a person who is not him. When Armin Tamzarian took the name, he did not just take the identity. He took the qualifications. And he has been deploying those qualifications in his management of Springfield Elementary for 2 decades. This raises questions about every decision he made as principal, every expulsion he authorized, every curriculum choice, every hiring decision. Every interaction with the school board, with parents, with the students who sat in his office and received whatever guidance he offered, all of it was offered by a man operating under false pretenses, under a borrowed authority that was never his to exercise. The show does not examine these implications. The episode resolves with the town voting to maintain the fiction, and the show moves on. But if you are thinking about Springfield Elementary as an institution, about what it is doing to the children inside it, the Tamzarian revelation adds another layer to the institutional failure. The school's administrative leadership was a fraud. Not merely incompetent, not merely under-resourced, a literal fraud. A man performing an institutional role using credentials that belong to someone else. This is the institutional dysfunction of Springfield, taken to its extreme. Not just systems that fail to serve their purpose, but systems whose very authority is constituted by fiction. The school principal is not the principal. The credentials are not his. The authority is borrowed, and the children inside the building, who are already being failed by funding shortfalls and compromised teachers, and an environment that is quietly making everyone in it slightly less than they could be, are also being administered by a man whose right to administer them was established through deception. And they do not know. They cannot know, because the town voted to make knowing it illegal. There is something here about what authority actually is, about how much of the institutional authority we live under is constituted by exactly this kind of fiction. By accumulated agreement about what a person's credentials mean, about what an institution's track record demonstrates, about what a title confers. The specific fiction in Tamzarian's case is more dramatic than most, but the basic structure of it, authority as agreed upon fiction, is not unique to Springfield. Springfield just made the agreement explicit, voted on it, encoded it in a judicial decree. Most places maintain similar fictions through tacit agreement rather than formal vote. The outcome is the same. The principle remains principle. The credentials remain valid. The institution continues. The children continue to be educated inside it. Number, Krusty's legacy, what he leaves behind. Beyond the analysis of Krusty's career and his relationship with his father, there is a question worth spending time on. What has Krusty actually produced in Springfield? What is the legacy of decades of Krusty the Clown Show on the children who grew up watching it? The most honest answer is complicated. The Krusty the Clown Show, as depicted in the series, is an extremely profitable media property that has been running on Springfield television for longer than any of its original child audience has been alive. Multiple generations of Springfield children have grown up with Krusty as a formative media presence. The show is woven into the cultural fabric of Springfield in a way that goes beyond individual episodes or memorable moments. It is part of the infrastructure of Springfield childhood, the baseline against which other childhood experiences are measured. This is an enormous amount of influence to vest in a man who does not particularly care about the work, who phones it in. Who would be perfectly happy if someone else handled the performing while he focused on the endorsement deals and the gambling? And yet children love him. Bart loves him with a sincerity and an intensity that the show treats as one of Bart's most endearing qualities. The love is real. It is not transactional. Bart does not love Krusty because Krusty is good to him, or because the relationship is mutually beneficial. He loves Krusty the way you love a cultural figure who was present during the formation of your identity, who was part of the vocabulary of your childhood, who provided a frame through which the world became more legible. This kind of love does not require the beloved to be worthy of it. It does not require reciprocity or awareness or any quality in the loved figure beyond presence at the right moment. Krusty was present at the right moment for Bart, and Bart loves him. But what did Krusty actually give Bart? What did the show provide? The itchy and scratchy fantasy, the slapstick, the merchandising, the sense of being addressed as a child by something that understood what it meant to be a child, even if what it understood was primarily a market to be monetized. There is something specific that Krusty gave Springfield's children that the show rarely acknowledges directly. He gave them a model of entertainment that was honest about its own cynicism. Krusty does not pretend to care about children. Not really. The caring is part of the performance, but it is the most transparent part. Children are perceptive about this. They know when they are being sold to versus when they are being seen. And Krusty, despite not caring, despite his venality and his inattention and his reliance on old material, communicates something to his audience that more earnest entertainers do not always manage. He communicates that the world is a place where people do not always give you what you deserve, where the people in charge of entertaining you may be thinking about other things while they do it, where the systems you depend on are operated by human beings who have their own preoccupations and their own limitations. He communicates this not through any intentional message, but simply by being visibly himself, visibly insufficient, visibly a person who showed up and performed without fully inhabiting the performance. Children who grew up watching Krusty grew up expecting that the people in charge of things might not be entirely present, might not be entirely invested, might be performing a role with varying degrees of authenticity. This is a realistic expectation. It is better preparation for the world than the expectation you develop from entertainers who perform total investment and total care, because that expectation sets you up for a specifically crushing disillusionment. Krusty's accidental legacy to Springfield's children is a calibrated skepticism, not cynicism, which closes things down. Skepticism, which keeps a space open for genuine connection to surprise you while protecting you from the specific pain of expecting total care and receiving professional adequacy. This is not the legacy Krusty intended. It is not something he thought about or planned for or even noticed he was producing. But it is there, in the children who watched him, in the Bart who loves him with genuine feeling while being entirely clear-eyed about who and what Krusty actually is. That clarity, that capacity to love something imperfect without pretending it is perfect, is possibly the most functional emotional skill in Springfield. And Krusty, without trying to, gave it to a generation. Number Springfield's economy? Who is actually getting paid? The economics of Springfield are deliberately vague and deliberately inconsistent, in the same way that the geography is vague and inconsistent. The show needs Homer to sometimes be broke and sometimes be able to afford whatever the episode requires, so it does not commit to a stable income figure. The show needs Springfield to sometimes feel like a prosperous town and sometimes feel like an economically struggling one, so it does not commit to a clear economic picture. But there are things the show has established that, taken together, tell a more coherent economic story than the surface inconsistencies suggest. The power plant is the primary employer in Springfield. This is established definitively, and it carries enormous implications. A town whose primary employer is a single company owned by a single man is an economic environment that functions very differently from a diversified economy. Every dollar that circulates in Springfield ultimately traces back, through some chain of transactions, to Burns's payroll. The restaurant Homer eats at survives because Homer has money to eat there. Homer has money because Burns pays him. The school that taxes support is supported by taxes on income that Burns generates. The police department that Chief Wiggum mismanages exists because the municipal budget is funded by economic activity that Burns's plant enables. Burns does not just employ the people who work at the plant, he employs the town. The entire economic ecosystem of Springfield is downstream of his payroll decisions. Every time Burns considers closing the plant, every time a storyline involves the plant being threatened, the show is depicting not just a business crisis but an existential municipal crisis. Because without Burns's plant, Springfield's economy does not have an alternative engine. There is no second major employer waiting to absorb the displacement. There is just the plant and Burns, and the entire town holding its breath every time his mood shifts. This is the specific shape of the economic power that Burns holds over Springfield. And it explains, more concretely than any radiation theory needs to, why the town never challenges Burns meaningfully. Every person who lives in Springfield, whether or not they work at the plant directly, is economically dependent on Burns's continued operation of it. Challenging Burns risks the plant. Risking the plant risks the economy. Risking the economy risks everyone's ability to pay their mortgage, buy their groceries, send their children to a school that is already barely funded enough to stay open. The economic trap is as real as the environmental trap, and the two reinforces each other. Burns runs the plant in a way that is economically essential to Springfield and environmentally devastating to it. The town cannot afford to stop the environmental devastation because the economic devastation that would follow is equally threatening. It is caught between two versions of harm and can choose neither because choosing one requires accepting the other. This is the economic logic that keeps Homer at Sector 7G. Not just the deal that Abe made with Burns, not just Homer's cognitive limitations, not just the radiation theory's production of a population too damaged to mount effective resistance. The economic logic. Homer's paycheck is Springfield's paycheck, in miniature. His employment at the plant is not just his employment. It is a tiny piece of the economic equilibrium that keeps the whole town functioning. Disrupting it, even for the best reasons, would have cost that Homer, whose family depends on his paycheck, is not constituted to accept. Burns built this. Deliberately or not, the specific structure of economic dependence he created in Springfield is the most effective containment system he possesses. More effective than any political influence. More durable than any legal arrangement. Because the political influence can be challenged, and the legal arrangements can be dissolved, but economic dependence is self-enforcing. The people who are contained by it are its most effective enforcers, because they have the most to lose from disrupting it. Springfield is not just a contamination zone. It is an economic hostage situation that has been running so long that the hostages have started to mistake the hostage-taking for home. Number. Lisa and her saxophone. The sound of a character the show won't let go of. There is a specific recurring image in The Simpsons that appears across dozens of episodes in dozens of different contexts. Lisa, alone, playing her saxophone. Not in a performance context, not for an audience. Simply playing. In her room, on the roof, in the backyard, in various locations throughout Springfield. Alone with the instrument and the sound it makes, disconnected from the rest of the episode, from the plot, from the comedy, from everything else the show is doing. These moments are brief. They are not plot relevant. They do not advance the episode story. They are what television writers call grace notes, small moments that exist for their own sake, that add texture and depth without contributing to the mechanics of the episode. The grace notes with Lisa and her saxophone have accumulated across 36 seasons into something that functions differently from individual moments. They form a portrait, an aggregate image of a character who, in her most private moments, in the spaces between the episodes and the plots and the causes she champions, and the arguments she makes and the lessons she learns and the lessons she forgets, retreats to the saxophone and plays. The sound she makes with the saxophone is rarely described by the show. The music is present as atmosphere rather than as specific content. It is jazz, generally, because the show established Lisa's musical identity in relation to jazz and jazz's particular relationship with improvisation and emotional expression. Jazz as a form that takes feeling and gives it structure. That takes something that cannot be said in words and finds a way to say it in the only language left. Lisa plays because she has things that cannot be said in words. Things that her verbal intelligence, extraordinary as it is, cannot access or articulate. The saxophone is her second intelligence. The one that operates in the register below language, in the space where the things you know but cannot say live. What does Lisa play in those alone moments? What is the emotional content that the saxophone is processing for her? The show does not tell us. It gives us the image and the sound and lets us fill in the content ourselves. But we know enough about Lisa to make a reasonable guess. She plays the loneliness. The particular loneliness of being the most aware person in a room full of people who love her without quite seeing her. The loneliness of the gap between what she knows Springfield is and what she can do about it. The loneliness of 8 years old and brilliant and alone, which is a loneliness that does not have adequate verbal expression because the vocabulary for it, the vocabulary of early genius in constrained circumstances, is not part of most people's emotional language. She plays the love that she cannot easily express directly. Her love for her family is real, and it is complicated by the very intelligence that makes her exceptional. She loves Homer even though she can see clearly what Homer is, which is harder than loving someone you cannot see clearly. She loves Bart even though their relationship is structured by competition and rivalry and the specific frustration of being the sibling who performs better in the metrics that matter while watching the other sibling refuse to be measured by those metrics. She loves Marge with a particular intensity that the show sometimes depicts as mother-daughter identification and sometimes as something more like desperate need. The saxophone can hold all of this without needing to resolve it into something simpler. She plays the grief. For what Springfield could have been, for what she could have been in a different environment, for the specific losses that a child experiences when the world around them consistently fails to match the world they can see should exist. This is a grief that most adults have difficulty naming, because most adults experienced it as children and do not have the vocabulary for it, because the vocabulary was not developed until they were old enough that the original grief had been displaced by other, more immediately nameable feelings. Lisa has the vocabulary. She has more vocabulary than almost anyone in Springfield. And still, the grief of this particular thing does not have words. It has music. It has the sound of a saxophone played alone, in the backyard of a yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, in a town that does not know quite what to do with the child playing it. The saxophone moments are the show's acknowledgement that it knows what it is doing to Lisa, that it knows the floating timeline is keeping her in the wound, that it knows the character it has created deserves more than the format can provide. The grace notes are the show's apology, not sufficient, but sincere. The acknowledgement that the instrument and the music and the solitude are what is left when the format cannot do what the character requires. Lisa plays. And the show keeps coming back to the image because it cannot afford to let it go. Because the image of Lisa alone with her saxophone is the truest image the show has of itself. Of what it knows it is and what it wishes it could do differently. Number. The final loop. what 36 years actually means for a viewer. We have been in Springfield for 4 hours. The mysteries are still there. The characters are still in the same configurations. The loop has not broken. Nothing has been resolved. But something has happened in the time we have spent here, something that is worth naming before we leave. We have built a relationship with this place. Not a parasocial relationship with the characters, though that is real too. A relationship with the place itself. With Springfield as a geography, as an ecology, as a social system, as the specific and peculiar product of 36 years of television production that has accumulated into something more than the sum of its parts. This is what long-running serialized fiction does when it does it well enough. It becomes a place you can return to. A place with enough internal consistency, enough recurring landmarks, enough familiar inhabitants, that returning to it feels like returning to somewhere rather than engaging with something. Springfield is somewhere. It has been somewhere for 36 years, and the people who have been watching it for that duration, or for any significant portion of it, have a relationship with Springfield that is qualitatively different from the relationship viewers have with the settings of shorter-lived shows. They have accumulated memories of this place, specific episodes, specific moments, specific details that lodged in the memory and stayed there. They have their own private Springfield built from the specific episodes they watched at the specific moments in their lives when they watched them. This is why the mysteries matter. Not because solving them would improve the show. The show is not waiting to be solved. The mysteries matter because engaging with them is a form of engagement with Springfield itself. Every fan theory, every deep reading, every frame-by-frame analysis of a single episode's background details is a way of extending the relationship with the place, of going deeper into something that has become significant in the specifically personal way that places become significant. You go deeper into Springfield because Springfield is worth going deeper into, not because there is a treasure at the center waiting to be found, but because depth itself, in a place you love, is its own reward. The finding is in the looking. This is ultimately what 4 hours of Simpsons Mysteries is, not a series of questions waiting for answers, a long walk through a place that rewards walking, an extended stay in a geography that has more to see than any one visit can encompass. The unresolved questions are the invitation to come back. The dropped threads are the paths that disappear into the woods and make you want to follow them. The characters whose stories are incomplete are the people you keep thinking about after you have left the room, because you are still wondering what happened to them. Springfield has been generating that kind of wondering for 36 years. It will keep generating it for however long it continues to run. And after it stops running, the reruns and the streaming libraries and the cultural memory will keep the wondering alive. The mysteries do not need to be solved. They need to be revisited. And every revisit finds something new. Something that was there the last time but that you were not quite looking for. Something that only becomes visible when you have seen enough of the surrounding context to know where to look. The three-eyed fish is still in the river. Burns is still alive. Maggie is still watching. Homer is still pressing the button. And Lisa is still playing her saxophone, alone in the backyard, making the sound of everything the show knows and cannot say. Come back whenever you need to. Springfield will be here. It always is. Number, the supporting cast's invisible lives, characters in the background of Springfield who deserved more. Springfield is overpopulated in the way that only a show running for 3 decades can be. There are dozens of recurring secondary characters, hundreds of one-episode characters, and an uncountable mass of background residents who appear in crowd scenes and town meetings without names or histories. The named secondary characters alone could fill a book. Many of them were given more backstory in a single episode than most television characters receive across entire series runs. And then the show moved on, as it always moved on, and the backstory became an artifact rather than a foundation. Let us spend time with some of the people the show half built and then quietly left standing. Groundskeeper Willie is one of the show's most iconic secondary characters, which means he is also one of the show's most inconsistently handled secondary characters. His defining characteristic is his specific and profound hostility toward, eventually, almost everything: children, France, administrators, the physical conditions of his employment, the general trajectory of his life in Springfield. He is angry in a way that is performed for comedy, but that also contains, in its specific texture, something that reads as genuine. Willie's background, when it has been addressed, involves Scotland. a home he left or was forced to leave under circumstances that vary depending on which episode is providing the detail, a family that exists in memory rather than in present reality, a sense of exile that the Scottish setting provides, the dramatic landscape of loss and displacement that sits underneath his Springfield persona the way all the other secret selves sit underneath their hosts in this town. But Willie's backstory has been used primarily as a joke delivery system. His accent, his emotional volatility, his physical toughness, his specific cultural references, these are comedy tools. And they are very effective comedy tools. Willie is funny in ways that some of the show's more carefully constructed characters are not, precisely because the comedy of his character operates at a surface level that is immediately accessible. The cost is that whatever lies beneath the surface has never been accessed with the same care that the comedy is accessed with. There is a Willie who came to Springfield from somewhere, who left something behind, who has built whatever his life in Springfield is on top of something that is never fully excavated. And that Willie is intermittently present in the episodes that give him more than a reaction shot or a catchphrase. But he is never quite fully arrived at. Consider the episode in which Willie's cottage, his home within Springfield Elementary's grounds, is destroyed. The cottage is not just his living space, it is his Springfield, the specific geographic anchor that the Springfield exile has built as a substitute for the home he left. The destruction of the cottage is played for comedy and genuine pathos simultaneously, and the show handles the balance reasonably well. But the episode resolves without fully examining what Willie is doing in Springfield at all. What keeps him here, what the alternative would be, why the groundskeeper job at an underfunded elementary school in a contaminated town has become the life he is living. The answer that the show implies, when it implies anything, is that Willie has nowhere else to go, that the exile is permanent because the original home is no longer accessible for reasons that are never fully specified. That Springfield, terrible as it is the place that has him. And so he stays and maintains the grounds, and screams at the children who transgress on his grass and lives in his cottage on the edge of institutional property. This is a quietly devastating situation when you look at it directly. A man in permanent exile, maintaining a patch of grounds at a school that cannot afford to maintain anything adequately, screaming at children because the children are what he has to yell at, and the yelling at least produces the sense of being heard. Willie is funny. He is also one of the loneliest people in Springfield, which is a meaningful distinction in a town that contains Mo and Barney and Ned and Lisa and all the other specific varieties of Springfield loneliness we have already examined. And then there is Patty and Selma Bouvier, Marge's sisters. The pair of women who exist in Springfield as a unit, who are almost never seen apart, who share a perspective and a set of habits, and a relationship to the world that the show uses primarily as comedy contrast to Marge's domestic warmth. Patty and Selma are mean, not in the cartoonishly evil way, in the specific mean way of people whose lives did not go the way they planned and who have processed that disappointment into a general hostility toward happiness that they do not personally possess. They work at the Department of Motor Vehicles, which in the show's symbolic geography represents the apex of bureaucratic meaninglessness, the place where the human capacity for making other humans' lives slightly worse is given institutional sanction. They smoke. They maintain an active hatred for Homer that the show treats as comedy, but that is, if you look at it closely, the projected resentment of women who watch their sister choose the wrong man and who have been living with the consequences of that choice, which include a brother-in-law they cannot get rid of for their entire adult lives. But here's the thing about Patty and Selma that the show raised in the episode where Selma wants to have a baby. The revelation that Selma, underneath the shared persona of the Bouvier sisters, wants something that the shared persona cannot accommodate. She wants to be a mother. She wants the specific experience of raising a child, of having something that is hers in a way that her relationship with Patty, their codependent sibling bond, cannot provide. The episode is funny and also genuinely moving in the way that the show manages when it gives secondary characters room to want things. Selma tries the conventional route, the disastrous blind date with Troy McClure, and when the conventional route does not produce what she wants, she pursues adoption. And eventually she adopts, and the episode resolves with Selma as a mother in some sense. But the arc of the episode raises a question that the show does not pursue. If Selma wanted this, what does Patty want? The two sisters are so thoroughly presented as a unit that the show rarely distinguishes their interior lives from each other. They share opinions, they share space, They share the hostility toward Homer and the ambivalent warmth toward Marge, and the specific resigned quality of people who have made their peace with the life they have, rather than the life they wanted. But they are not actually the same person. The Selma episode proved that. Their paths diverged, at some point, in ways the show acknowledged once and then returned to treating as a unified facade. Patty has her own wants, her own griefs, her own version of what she expected from her life and how the actual version compares to it. The show gave Patty an episode about this too, eventually. An episode in which Patty's sexuality became the focus, in which a relationship gave her something that the established Patty persona did not previously have access to. But the episode resolved in the way that secondary character episodes often resolve, with the emotional territory covered and then the character returned to their established role. Patty and Selma are available, if you look closely enough, as two specific individuals who have built a shared persona partly out of genuine affinity and partly because having a partner in the persona makes it easier to sustain. The shared cynicism is a mutual support system. The shared hostility is a collective defense. Together they present a unified front that keeps certain things at a distance, certain hopes that have been deferred too long to be allowed back in, certain possibilities that the life they have built does not have room for. Separate them, and you have two women with separate histories and separate wants and separate griefs who have chosen, for reasons that make sense even if they are never fully articulated, to face Springfield together rather than alone. This is actually one of the more functional relationships in Springfield. The mutual support is real, even if what it supports is sometimes not entirely healthy. Patty and Selma have each other. In a town where so many characters have no one who actually sees them, having someone is not nothing. Having someone who chose to show up, who made the choice to be present and stay present, is a great deal. The grumpy facade is not the relationship, it is the coating on the relationship. The relationship, underneath it, is two women who decided a long time ago that they were going to face whatever life provided together, and who have maintained that decision across whatever life provided, which has included quite a lot. The show could have done more with this. It could have looked behind the shared facade at the specific people holding it up. It gestured at it, in the Selma episode and in the Patty episode and in various smaller moments across the decades. But the gesture was always partial. The full examination never quite arrived. And so Patty and Selma remain primarily what they were designed to be: comedy contrast to Marge, background hostility for Homer, and the occasional vehicle for an episode that allows one of them to want something in a way that the shared persona cannot contain. There is more there. There is always more there in Springfield. The show just keeps running out of time to look for it. Number. The nuclear family as metaphor. What The Simpsons is actually about. The show is called The Simpsons. The focus is the family, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the specific configuration of Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. Everything else, Springfield, Burns, the secondary characters, the town's history and geography and institutional failures, all of it orbits the family. The family is the center of gravity that holds the entire Springfield universe in place. This has been true from the beginning. The show began as a family sitcom, as a cartoon about a specific kind of American family. The working-class family, the family that is not affluent enough to be aspirational but not poor enough to be a social problem narrative. The family that is in the middle, in the sense of being neither here nor there, neither succeeding according to whatever the current cultural definition of success is, nor failing visibly enough to demand attention. Homer works at the plant. Marge manages the household. The children attend school. The family watches television and eats dinner together and disagrees and reconciles and faces small crises and survives them and goes to sleep and wakes up and does it again. This is the engine of the show. This is what it was built to depict. And then it kept running. And the family that was designed to represent a specific kind of American ordinary life became, over 36 years, something more complicated and more specifically strange. The working-class ordinary family that was designed to be recognizable to a broad American audience became a family in a contaminated town run by an immortal billionaire whose safety inspector is a man with a crayon lodged in his brain and whose daughters represent opposite ends of the radiation mutation spectrum. The show kept the family at the center throughout all of this. Whatever else changed, whatever escalations occurred, whatever theories accumulated in the background, the family stayed. Homer and Marge and the children. The couch and the television and the kitchen with the yellow walls. This is the show's thesis. Not the radiation theory, not the coma theory, not any of the elaborate constructions that the fan community has built in the space the show created by being simultaneously deeply written and perpetually unresolved. The thesis is simpler than any of those. The thesis is, the family persists. Not that the family is good or right or correctly constituted, not that the family is a model or an aspiration, just that it persists. That the specific combination of people in the house on Evergreen Terrace have, across 36 years of catastrophe and comedy and the occasional genuine heartbreak, remained a family, remained present to each other, remained, despite everything, together. This is not a small thing to assert. The history of American television is full of families that did not persist, that dissolved in the final season or the crisis episode or the network cancellation that ended the show before it ended itself. The Simpsons family has never dissolved. Homer and Marge have never permanently separated. The children have never grown up and left. The house has never been sold. The configuration has held. Within the fiction, this is partly explained by the floating timeline. Nobody can leave if nobody ages. But the emotional truth of the persistence is not reducible to the mechanical explanation. The show keeps the family together because the show needs the family together, yes, but also because the show believes in the family, not in any naive sense. Not with the sentimentality that would require ignoring what the family actually costs its individual members, which is a great deal, but in the sense that the show has looked at this specific configuration of people, at all of their specific failures and limitations, and the ways they damage each other, and has decided that what they are together is worth more than the sum of what they are separately. The family is worth more than its parts, not because the parts are not individually valuable, because the combination produces something that the individual parts cannot produce alone. The specific warmth that the house on Evergreen Terrace contains, the specific texture of a life lived inside that configuration, the way Homer's love for his family, imperfect and often badly expressed as it is nonetheless the most genuine thing about him. The way Marge's patience, costly as it is also the structural intelligence that makes the whole thing possible. The way Bart's chaos and Lisa's striving and Maggie's silence each contribute something irreplaceable to the ecosystem of the house. This is what the show has been depicting for 36 years, underneath everything else. Underneath the theories and the mysteries and the dropped threads and the institutional failures and the contaminated water and the immortal billionaire and the dreaming man in the hospital bed, a family persisting, imperfectly at great cost to its individual members, with enormous structural support from the floating timeline and the non-aging rule and all the other narrative conveniences that the show has deployed to keep the configuration intact. But persisting, and the reason it has not gotten old, the reason people are still watching, the reason we are still talking about it at 4 a.m, is that the persistence means something. That something matters about watching these particular people stay together in this particular house, in this particular impossible town for this particular and continuously extending duration. It means that the thing is possible, not easy, not without cost, but possible. That a family can absorb everything a family can absorb, which according to the show is quite a lot, including radiation and comas and immortal billionaires, and the occasional murder attempt by a clown's ex-sidekick, and remain a family. This is the comfort of Springfield. Not that everything is fine. Clearly everything is not fine. The comfort is that everything is not fine and the family is still there, still on the couch, still together. That is the thing the show is saying that no theory quite captures and no analysis quite reaches. The thing that has kept people watching for 36 years and that will keep them watching for however long the show continues. The family is still there. Number. Homer's relationships with men. The friendships the show built and what they mean. One of the things The Simpsons has been quietly excellent at across its run is depicting male friendship. Not in the sanitized, sitcom version of male friendship where men do activities together and occasionally express appreciation for each other in carefully managed doses. In a stranger, more honest version. A version where the friendship is expressed through shared silence and parallel presence and the specific kind of loyalty that does not articulate itself because articulating it would make it something different from what it is. Homer's friendship with Lenny and Carl is the primary example, and we have already addressed the specific texture of Lenny and Carl's relationship with each other. But consider what Homer's relationship with each of them independently looks like. Lenny Leonard has been Homer's coworker for his entire adult career. They work in the same building, in the same department, at adjacent workstations. They have spent more working hours in each other's company than either of them has spent with almost anyone else in their lives. And the friendship that has developed from that proximity is one of the most unexamined significant relationships in the show. Lenny knows Homer, not in the way Marge knows Homer, not with the depth of marital intimacy and shared domestic life, and the long accumulation of watching someone at their worst and most vulnerable, but in the way of someone who has witnessed a person in their daily life for decades, who has seen them make the same choices over and over, who has watched the patterns repeat, who has been present for enough of Homer's disasters and enough of his small triumphs to have a genuinely comprehensive view of who Homer is in his working life. And Lenny maintains the friendship anyway. Not out of obligation, not because proximity makes avoidance difficult, but with a genuine warmth that the show depicts in the specific and quiet way that genuine warmth operates. He looks out for Homer, not dramatically, not in the way that the show sometimes depicts heroic friendship in its more emotionally explicit episodes. In the small ways. The warning that tells Homer when he is about to do something that will get him in trouble. The presence at the bar at the end of a hard day. The willingness to simply be in the same space without requiring the space to produce anything. This is a real thing. It is a specific and genuine form of care. And Homer, who is often depicted as oblivious to the care that people extend toward him, receives this from Lenny with a gratitude that he cannot quite articulate, but that manifests in the loyalty he extends in return. Homer is loyal to Lenny in the same inarticulate way. He will show up, he will be present, he will not examine the friendship too closely because examining things too closely is not Homer's way, but he will also not abandon it. Carl Carlson's friendship with Homer is slightly different in texture because Carl's relationship to Springfield is slightly different. Carl is, by most measures, more functional than Homer, more capable in his work, more socially sophisticated. He has a graduate degree, the show mentions at one point, which makes his continued presence in Sector 7G another of Springfield's quiet inexplicables. Why is Carl here? He has the credentials for somewhere better. He has the social intelligence for more sophisticated company. The answer, when the show gestures at it, is that Carl is here because Carl is here. That Springfield became home before he had the cognitive distance to understand whether it was a good home. That leaving would require a kind of deliberate rupture that Carl, who is loyal in the same quiet way that his friendships are quiet, is not constituted to make. Carl and Homer's friendship has a specific flavor that is worth naming. Carl is fond of Homer in the way you are fond of someone whose specific combination of qualities would be maddening in larger doses, but who, in the specific role they occupy in your life, provides something irreplaceable. Homer, as a friend, is entirely present. He is not distracted by larger ambitions or by concerns about his professional trajectory or by the kind of social calculation that more socially sophisticated people sometimes cannot turn off even in their personal relationships. When Homer is with you, he is with you. His attention, such as it is entirely given. This is valuable, particularly for Carl, who is navigating a social environment, the working-class camaraderie of the plant mixed with the specific complications of being one of the few black men in Springfield's depicted social circles that requires a certain amount of ongoing calculation. Homer's company is one of the places where Carl does not have to calculate, where the friendship is so straightforwardly itself that it does not produce the kind of exhaustion that navigating more complex social landscapes produces. Homer's male friendships are, in this reading, some of the most emotionally healthy relationships he has. Not because they are sophisticated or because they include the kind of emotional processing that relationships are theoretically supposed to include, but because they are consistent and uncalculating and loyal in the specific way that Springfield allows loyalty, without agenda, without expectation of self-improvement or reciprocal emotional labor, just present, just there. This is, potentially, what the bar is for. Not just as an institution, as we examined earlier, but as the specific location where Homer's male friendships can exist in the form they need to exist in. The bar is the place where no one has to be more than they are, where the specific texture of these quiet, loyal, inarticulate friendships can be maintained without the pressure of more demanding contexts. The bar is where Springfield's men go to be small, in the best sense of the word, to stop performing whatever it is the world requires them to perform. to be exactly what they are with people who know exactly what they are and have decided that is sufficient. Homer's friendships are not aspirational. They do not make him better or challenge him or push him toward growth. They maintain him. They provide the kind of baseline stability that allows someone to endure the specific rigors of their existence without collapsing entirely. Without the friendships, Homer is a man alone with his family, which is both too much and not enough. With the friendships, Homer is a man with a family and a bar and people who will be there when he shows up. That difference is not trivial. That difference is everything. Number. The Simpsons movie's dark promise. What the dome actually meant. In 2007, the Simpsons movie arrived in cinemas, 18 years after the show began, the culmination of decades of promises and near misses and fan anticipation, and the movie delivered something that the regular show had never quite managed. It delivered consequences. The dome over Springfield. The EPA, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determining that Springfield was so contaminated that it needed to be physically contained, that the pollution could not be allowed to spread, that the entire town needed to be sealed off from the rest of the country. Think about what this means, not as a plot device but as an institutional statement. The United States government, operating through its own regulatory apparatus, looked at Springfield and concluded that the town constituted a public health crisis of sufficient severity to warrant extraordinary action. The dome is not a metaphor. Within the show's fiction, it is a genuine governmental response to a genuine environmental catastrophe. And the response is containment rather than remediation. The government does not send in cleanup crews. It does not shut down the power plant and begin the process of environmental recovery. It seals the town. It puts a dome over it and tells the residents that they are inside the problem and the rest of the country needs to be protected from them. This is, if you follow the logic, an acknowledgement that the problem is not fixable, or at least not fixable on any timeline that the government is prepared to invest in. Remediation would be expensive and slow and politically complicated. The dome is faster and cleaner from the government's perspective. Contain the contamination, prevent spread, move on. The people inside the dome are left inside the dome. They did not cause the contamination in any meaningful sense. They were the victims of it, the people who have been breathing the air and drinking the water and living in the shadow of the cracked cooling towers. And the government's response to their victimization is to seal them in with the thing that victimized them. This is the movie's darkest moment, and the show treats it as a plot device rather than examining it directly. The dome is the problem the movie needs to solve so that Homer can have his redemption arc and the family can be reunited and Springfield can be restored. The dome is narratively necessary. But the institutional logic of the dome, the government's decision to contain rather than remediate, is real and horrifying if you look at it directly. And the movie does not quite look at it directly. It moves too fast. It has too much plot to cover. It needs to get to the resolution. And the resolution requires the dome to be removed and the family to be saved and Springfield to be restored. But the dome happened. Within the show's fiction, the United States government sealed Springfield under a dome. That is in the canon. That is established. And the fact that the dome was eventually removed does not unestablish that the government looked at this town full of yellow-skinned, four-fingered people living next to a nuclear plant with 342 safety violations and said, "This is a contamination zone, and we are going to contain it." The government knew. The movie established that someone in authority knew and had been monitoring Springfield and had made a decision about what to do about it. And the decision was not to fix the problem. The decision was to seal the town. This is the radiation theory's most powerful piece of canonical support. Not the three-eyed fish, not Homer's resilience, not Maggie's intelligence, the dome, the federal government officially classifying Springfield as a containment zone. The show established this and then removed the dome and continued as before. The dome was real. The government's assessment was real. The classification of Springfield as an environmental hazard was real. And then it was undone by the movie's plot requirements, and the next season's episodes began as if the dome had not happened, as if the government had not officially determined that this town was too contaminated to be allowed to exist in normal contact with the rest of the country. Springfield resets. It always resets, even after the federal government puts a dome over it. This is the show's most audacious reset. This is the collective denial mechanism at its most extreme. A dome, sealed by the EPA. removed by a determined family and a town that rebelled against its confinement, and then forgotten, filed away. Added to the accumulation of things that Springfield has survived and declined to remember. The dome did not change anything. Homer still presses the button. Burns still owns the plant. The water still flows through the pipes. The three-eyed fish is still in the river. And nobody in Springfield, in the episodes that followed the movie, ever mentions the dome. The dome is Springfield's most dramatic proof of its own premise. A federal containment dome could not change this town. A dome could not make the residents acknowledge what the dome was acknowledging about their situation. The government sealed them in and they broke out, and they went right back to the life that the dome had been built to contain. Because home is home. Even if home is a contamination zone, even if the government has officially classified your home as too dangerous to allow into contact with the rest of the country, you go back, you go home. You sit on the couch and watch television and drink a beer and let the dome be a story you tell rather than a fact you live with. That is Springfield. That has always been Springfield. Number. The quiet genius of Springfield's minor characters as environmental indicators. One of the things the show has done with extraordinary subtlety across 3 decades of episodic content is use its minor characters as environmental indicators, as the specific evidence of what the Springfield ecosystem does to different kinds of people at different stages of life. We have talked about many of these characters individually, but it is worth spending some time on the pattern itself, on what the collective portrait of Springfield's minor characters tells you about the specific environment they are all living in. The characters who enter Springfield from outside, who come as visitors or temporary residents and then leave, tend to leave changed, usually not for the better. The show has a recurring dynamic in which outsiders arrive with something intact that Springfield gradually erodes. Their idealism, their sense of possibility, their confidence in the systems they represent. Whatever quality made them functional in their world of origin gets tested against Springfield and found inadequate. This is most visible in the episodes involving authority figures from outside, inspectors, government officials, journalists. People who come to Springfield with some official capacity and who leave having either given up on their mission or been corrupted by the specific logic of the environment. The FBI agent who came to investigate Mona Simpson left having witnessed something he could not easily process within the framework of his professional training. The EPA officials who sealed the town under the dome were themselves immediately confronted with the limits of federal authority when the town refused to behave the way the regulatory framework assumed it would. Springfield does not respond normally to normal institutional intervention. The systems that are designed to function in normal American towns encounter something in Springfield that they are not equipped for, and the people who represent those systems are changed by the encounter, made slightly less certain, made slightly more aware of the gap between the models they were trained with and the reality those models are supposed to describe. This is itself a kind of radiation, not the nuclear kind, the epistemological kind. A contact with Springfield that subtly compromises the certainty structures of the people who come into contact with it. A town that, by being thoroughly itself, makes the certainty of the outside world feel slightly less warranted. The long-term residents, the people who have been in Springfield their entire lives, have gone through a different process, not the acute encounter with Springfield's strangeness that outside visitors experience. The slow, total immersion that is the everyday experience of people who have never known anything else, who do not experience Springfield as strange because Springfield is their baseline, who cannot see what is unusual about their town because the unusual is all they have ever known. This is the most powerful form of environmental effect, not the shock of encountering something wrong, the gradual normalization of wrongness until it no longer reads as wrong, until the three-eyed fish is just a fish. Until the man who has been alive for over a century is just the employer. Until the family with the yellow skin and the 4 fingers is just the family next door. Springfield has accomplished this with its entire population. Every resident, through the simple process of being a resident of Springfield for long enough, has arrived at a relationship with the town's strangeness that reads as comfort. The strangeness is home. Home is strange. The distinction is no longer available. And the minor characters, the background figures who populate the town meeting scenes and the crowd reactions and the drive-by jokes are the fullest expression of this process. They are people who have been entirely normalized by Springfield, who register no surprise at anything because there is nothing left to be surprised by, who exist in a permanent condition of acclimated strangeness that looks, from the outside, like blissful ignorance and might actually be something more like adaptive resilience. They have survived Springfield. Not elegantly, not without cost, not without the specific physical and cognitive compromises that the radiation theory predicts. But they have survived it. They are there, in the background of every episode, populating the town, making Springfield feel inhabited, making the Simpson family feel embedded in a community rather than isolated in a void. These unnamed, barely seen background characters are doing essential work. They are the proof that Springfield is real, that it is a place with enough population density and social texture to function as a setting rather than a backdrop. And their presence, episode after episode, season after season, is its own kind of testament. They survived. Whatever Springfield is, whatever it does to the people inside it, there are enough people inside it who have made peace with being inside it that the town remains populated. That the stores stay open and the school stays running and the bar stays full and the power plant keeps humming. Springfield persists because its people persist, not because the conditions are good, not because the situation is sustainable by any rational assessment. Because the people are there and they are staying, and their staying is itself the continuation of the town. This is the deepest truth the show has to offer about communities. About places. About what makes a place persist beyond the point where persistence is rational. The people who refuse to leave because leaving would mean acknowledging that the place is not worth staying in. And the refusal is not stupidity. It is loyalty. To the place, to the community, to the specific texture of a life lived in a specific location, with specific people, across a specific duration, that has become too significant to simply walk away from. Springfield's people are loyal to Springfield. Even knowing what we know about the radiation and the contamination and the billionaire and the dome and the three-eyed fish, even knowing all of it, they stay. And that staying, that persistent, inarticulate, possibly irrational loyalty to a place that has objectively not served them well, is the most human thing in the entire show. More human than Homer's love for his family, which is uncomplicated by the evidence. More human than Lisa's continued idealism, which is maintained through extraordinary effort. More human than Marge's patience, which is superhuman by any realistic standard. The background people of Springfield staying in Springfield because it is home and home is where you stay, even when home is a contamination zone sealed by a federal dome. That is human. That is fully and completely and irreducibly human. And The Simpsons has been depicting it for 36 years without quite saying it directly. It did not need to say it directly. It just needed to keep showing you the background people, in episode after episode, living their lives in the contaminated town. Number A. Note on Springfield's relationship. With time, the final observation. There is one last thing worth saying, and it is the thing that ties together every single section of this 4-hour journey more completely than any theory manages on its own. Springfield's relationship with time is not broken. It is deliberate. The show has not failed to age its characters. The show has chosen not to age its characters. The floating timeline is not a production limitation being worked around. It is a creative commitment being honored. And the commitment it is honoring is the commitment to preserve something. What is being preserved is not the characters specifically, not Bart's 10-year-oldness or Lisa's 8-year-oldness in isolation. What is being preserved is the relationship, the configuration, the family in the house, the specific dynamic that exists between these particular people in this particular arrangement. Every family has a window, a period in which the configuration that makes the family a family in the fullest sense exists. The children are in the house, the parents are together, the rituals of daily life, the dinners and the arguments and the television watching and the occasional moments of genuine connection that break through the noise are occurring. The window is real and it is finite, and everyone who has passed through it knows that it is the thing they would go back to if going back were possible. The Simpsons is what going back looks like. It is the window, held open by the mechanics of animation and the floating timeline and the collective agreement of writers and producers and network executives and the audience itself, all of them deciding, week after week, that the window should stay open a little longer. This is why the show has lasted as long as it has. Not because it has been consistently excellent, because it has not been consistently excellent, and people have continued to watch anyway. Not because it is technically innovative or culturally edgy or formally interesting, because it is none of those things in its later seasons, but because it keeps the window open. Because it keeps offering the specific comfort of the family and the house, together, intact. This is the comfort that 4 hours of Simpsons mysteries has been circling without quite naming. Not the comfort of answers. Not the comfort of mysteries resolved or threads picked up or drop stories finally completed. The comfort of return. Of the window still being there. Of the specific landscape of Springfield still being accessible, still being navigable, still containing the family in the house and the plant on the horizon and the bar on the corner and the school at the top of the hill. Still there. All of it, still there. You can go back. You can always go back to Springfield. That is the thing the show has been offering for 36 years. Not a narrative, not a mystery, not a theory. A place. A place to go back to. A place that will be the same when you arrive as it was when you left, because sameness is what the show is actually selling. Underneath all the comedy and the drama and the genuine moments of something more. The same family, the same house, the same town, the same window open with the light inside it warm and yellow. Go back whenever you need to. The window is open. The lights are on. Springfield is waiting. Good night.